Hey guys. This is what if Naruto became a samurai. On one fateful night, Hiruzen Sarutobi finally acts. Hidden away in the mountains of Tetsu no Kuni, Naruto dreams of becoming a shinobi. Meanwhile, a new menace, the Seifuku-sha, threatens the elemental nations. Hunted by dark forces and facing insurmountable odds, Naruto must forge his own path in a world full of terror, power, and betrayal. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 1 Mistakes. Hiruzen. A light drizzle started above the two forms on a rocky hill overlooking large troughs of decimated terrain. Churned earth was seen for miles in eerily straight lines, like some gargantuan beast the size of the open sky itself had begun tearing at the ground. That wasn't far from the truth. The light rain was the precursor to larger storms on the way, a simple gathering of strength for a more significant rainfall later. Sarutobi Hiruzen, third Hokage of Konohagakure, judged the heavy clouds as a tropical storm, one that the land of fire proper had very few due to the fact they were almost entirely inland, minus the coastal regions to the south. The Hokage would know this as they'd had maybe 3 or 4 in the 70 years of life he'd lived. As omens go, it wasn't the worst. The rain didn't care whether it was or was not a precursor to bad news as it gathered in tiny drops on the Sandaime Hokage's balding head, matting his sparse white hair, and running down his eyes, muddying his vision, yet he never blinked, staring at the land and the long furrows in the once beautiful forestry. The forestry Hashirama had built and cultivated. It was all so much ash and broken wood now. A voice, Shikaku Nara, Hiruzen thought, spoke out beside him. I'm so sorry, Hiruzen. Biwako is dead. We're not sure who could have eliminated Kushina's detail and gotten to her. And as for Asuma. Pregnant silence. There was nothing. Why was he even there, Shikaku? Biwako. Biwako knew what she'd gotten into helping Minato, but Asuma shouldn't have been where he was. Those were the first words the Hokage had spoken in a half hour. The Jonin commander looked both awkward and relieved to have something to say. Shinkiyuhi tried to stop him at the cordon, but when one of its tails crashed down onto their position, he and Kakashi slipped out of our reserve blockade with some of the others trying to get to the fourth. Asuma disappeared in the commotion, and we didn't find him until it was too late. Kakashi is still missing, presumed dead. We're assuming he went with Asuma. Shikaku and Hiruzen stared out over the broken landscape. This was his first failure. Downed trees were the largest victims, dozens of acres of broken stubs like toothpicks, shattered and tossed aside as if by a child having a tantrum with toys that were boring. But it was the sounds of death and the tyranny of fading life that were the hardest to ignore. Moans of the dying and screams of those still in the realm of the living drifted up over their position from where triage centers were being efficiently set up by medical ninja. The hospital was too far to be practical. Dr. Yakushi had really outdone himself in the wake of this tragedy. It was a brutal dagger in his mind as he wondered if Asuma had sounded like those down there. Those glottal, agonal moans made him think of the wars he'd been in, the throats he'd slit, the genin battalions he'd wholesale wiped from existence with combination elemental ninjutsu. The kind that squads of jonin stood only a fair chance to stand against. Was that what it was like to the Kyuubi? Easy, even trivial to kill humans? Perhaps Asuma had lay there hoping a medic would be along to put him back together like that poor man in the fairy tales who'd taken a sorry tumble. Speaking of a sorry tumble, his mind flayed him again with more of his failures. His second biggest disappointment, Tsunade, surfaced in his mind at the thought of Dr. Yakushi, someone who shouldn't have been head of Konoha General. It should have been her. Every time now, when he thought of that particular wayward student, it wasn't pity and sadness for Nawaki and Dan he felt, more casualties to their system, compassion rising, and clouding his judgment. Instead of that compassion that characterized his rule for the last 50 years and drove a wedge between him and his best friend Danzo Shimura, instead, he was white-knuckled with rage at the could have been, and no empathy was forthcoming. How many could she have saved today? He wondered where she was, perhaps gambling in a bar somewhere while her people died. Perhaps she could have saved his boy had she been here. Perhaps. If only she'd been here. Asuma and Biwako. And then there was Naruto to consider as well as the Uchiha, particularly Mikoto. Mikoto and her new powers. But there had to be a path through all of this forestry of bad luck. Thoughts raced in his aged head, but a clarity settled over him as he focused on the long troughs and furrows that broke up his beautiful country. Decisions crystallized in his mind. He decided his first order of business would be to fix his current mistakes. The thoughts stole his grief from him for a minute. They came rushing back as Shikaku spoke again. "I'm so sorry, my lord third." Hiruzen twitched and breathed out a breath not unlike those down on the battlefield, agonal breaths. He breathed in. He breathed out. "I'm no Hokage, Shikaku. I'm an old, broken man. How many failures is this now? Especially after today, I don't want to be Hokage. But I will be damned if my reign ends like this. I have plans, Shikaku. I'll need you." Shocked silence met his proclamation, but Hiruzen was thinking of all his other failures. Orochimaru. The madness that had spilled out of the laboratory when they had caught him experimenting on children still kept him up some nights. Children. His third failure. When his mouth finally moved, it didn't look like he was speaking to Shikaku. "You have a newborn son, yes, Shikaku?" "Yes, my lord, Shikamaru. He was born a few months ago." "Cherish him. This life is cruel." "My lord." "Do not call me that." A pause. Shikaku shifted, his white cloak, the symbol of his position as Jonin commander, curling in the wind. "Forgive me." Hiruzen stood, bones creaking. "No, it is I that must beg your forgiveness, I fear. It was an unworthy thought. Today is a tragic loss, and all but name and politeness must not be another casualty." The third Hokage stood, pulling his darker cloak around him. "My grief can wait. I fear we have more to do this night. Where is my new apprentice?" Gravel crunched behind them as a member of the ANBU, the right arm and hand of the Hokage, made itself known, pure white mask a beacon in the simmering, muggy darkness, long black hair flowing down her back visible like a hole in the twilight black surrounding their position. Hiruzen held Shikaku's gaze, not acknowledging her arrival. "The cost we all must pay will be, perhaps, more than we can bear, but bear it we must. I know not what the future holds for us, but I fear this is just the beginning of our misfortunes." The ANBU came to a blurring stop, leaves swirling, and held a small bundle of cloth out to there whether he wanted to be or not temporary Hokage. Alert violet eyes, the color of deep glacial melt in twilight, peered up at him from the blanketed form, hands working as though blindly searching for something he knew was there. Hiruzen grabbed the little chubby hand and held it. He smiled despite himself, and it hurt so much because his little boy, Asuma, was dead. Minato's was not, and he would see the boy raised right. Loved, cherished, prepared. He would not see his predecessor's child, burdened beyond belief with an overwhelmingly powerful entity of hate and rage and black emotion, come to any harm. He knew that sharks circled them now, the Seifuku-sha, the man in red, who had attacked and killed Biwako, her guard, Kushina, and now, well, if Mikoto hadn't been there and, oh God, Biwako. No, Naruto needed him now. He was a failure, but would not be a failure in this task he set himself. His losses would not stop him from doing this last thing before he saw her again. The light of his life, dear Biwako. The jagged edges of youthful memory cut as he pictured her smiling at him, hair curling and messy as she looked at him from across their bed. His mind swam back and forth between grief and resolve and 10, 20 emotions through the spectrum of loss. She and their beautiful children were dead. It was all Hiruzen could do not to break down right there. Hiruzen held tight to the tiny hand of the last Uzumaki. It steadied him as he let his grief flow through him, and it seemed the boy knew his grief as it raged in him because the boy stilled, staring at him, far too alert. How like Minato he was. Emotions roiled in him, and every image in his head was Biwako and Asuma. How would he tell Keiji that his baby brother was dead and his mother murdered by the Seifuku-sha? It would be another nail in the coffin for Keiji in regards to his father. Hiruzen knew his eldest would blame him, and it took all his decades of ironclad control to keep from incinerating everything around him in a fit of rage he hadn't felt in many, many years. It was as if he was falling down a deep, dark hole that had no end in sight. He wasn't fit to be Hokage after this, but luckily he'd found a new candidate. Someone, maybe worthy that he could tell everything to and let them clean up his mess. Bitter didn't begin to cover how he felt. Sir? Forcibly, the elderly man pushed away the tsunami of dark webs in his mind to focus on this dark purple-eyed, blonde-haired baby. Kushina's eyes and Minato's face and body. All he could see was Minato's face at the end, not long ago, as he pleaded with him to keep the young Jinchuriki safe and out of the clutches of those who would harm him. Minato's hand still in the last hand seal of that terribly powerful Fuinjutsu. The dead demon-consuming seal would stay with him till the end of his days, the feeling of God, the god of death, pressing and squeezing his heart and soul. And then the Baijidama of information his Hokage dropped as he breathed his last. Please, old man, keep him safe. Take care of our little Naruto. The man seemed to think, looking grave, and it seems that Uchiha Madara is the one behind this, behind it all. He is the man in red. That? Seifuku-sha. Fine dash. And then the fourth had died, his wife behind him with a bloody, mangled hole through her, beautiful red hair splayed around her like blood, those amazing Fuin chakra chains of hers disappearing, gone. He would protect Minato's son where he'd failed to protect his Hokage. This was not going to be his fourth failure. And what was he to make of the phrase, "It was Uchiha Madara"? It was utter nonsense. Impossible. The utterances of a man suffering from extreme blood loss and even more acute chakra loss. Uchiha Madara was one of the founders of Konohagakure itself. He was immensely powerful, on par with Hashirama-sensei, but he died 50 years now. It bore thought though, as Hiruzen had seen some unbelievable things in his time as Hokage. It couldn't be possible, could it? His student, Orochimaru, one of his greatest mistakes, had been searching for immortality his entire adult life. It was what had driven him, among other things, from Konoha. Madara was so powerful compared to today's level of shinobi that they were as children before his skill and might. Hashirama-sensei, the only possessor of the famed wood release, the very ability that raised the white birch cloud-touched skyscrapers of Konohagakure proper, blurred the line between God and man. Madara had been only slightly below equal. Their final battle had reshaped the landscape in the Valley of the End for 100 miles. Madara would be a problem, he'd warn his successor, if the fourth's words were even true, but the man in red, if he was Madara, had been all but fatally wounded in his exchange with Minato. He'd seen the horrible stomach wound with his own eyes trapped behind Kushina's barrier with Mikoto. So that was a problem for later. First order of business was to fix one of his longest-running mistakes. Hiruzen smiled. The pun with his student wasn't funny, but he had to smile anyway. The eldest surviving Sarutobi vowed that he would bring her home from where she'd been, lost. Shikaku, fetch my counselors and Jiraiya. The Jonin commander slapped a fist to his chest and retreated swiftly. But even as the third Hokage watched and cradled Naruto, eyeing Shikaku's retreating form, he knew there would be an ever-spiraling path from here, infinite branches in a tree. And Danzo. Alert them despite the hour. Tsunade would answer for her absence by replacing him, while he trained her real successor because if she did not, there was nothing to stop Danzo from taking the reins. But that was a distant fear, as there was nothing she could say or do that would deny him this, and if the last Senju thought she had surpassed her master she would quickly find he hadn't lost his edge. If anything, he'd become more savage. Hiruzen Sarutobi, a man the people called the god of shinobi, had very little he cared about left to lose. After all, a blade cracked and pitted with age made grievous wounds. Biwako. He'd finally learned his lesson. By hook or by crook, he would put the hat on that obstinate girl himself. The alternative was unthinkable. The smiling face of their sacrificial lamb, the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, smiled up at him at last and gurgled his apparent happiness, and the former third Hokage could feel the ghost of a smile crossed his face despite the horrific reality of the dead demon-consuming seal staring up at him from the baby's stomach. Permanently etched, and it was deeply cut grooves in ink that wasn't really ink. The seal was one of the most complex and intertwined works of fusion he'd ever seen, crawling into every single part of the baby's complex chakra network and spiraling out to rest on all 365 Tenketsu points. Naruto needed protection, that much was certain. A level of protection he could not get in Konohagakure, could not get anywhere, not with Danzo ensconced here and clamoring for the weaponization of Orochimaru's unsettlingly effective prototype curse seals. Perhaps they should send him away from this place? The old man shook his head. This was to be tabled until urgent matters were dealt with. Hiruzen looked up, calling after the retreating Nara. Gather my guard, Shikaku. We go to fetch a Senju. 4 days post nine-tailed attack. Sarutobi clan compound. Hiruzen sat at a desk in his office at his house, a dark-paneled depressing sort of hole in the wall within the largely empty compound, and watched his crystal ball in his nightclothes, not viewing anything in particular, simply sweeping across Konohagakure. The city has not stopped inspiring awe at its beauty and majesty. Naruto, all of a month old, sounded like he was sawing on a knot in the corner of the room as he slept. The kid, as Hiruzen had found out, was a voracious eater and sleeper. The temporary Hokage had found that the kid very much enjoyed running around, and if Sarutobi had learned anything from 2 kids, it was that he was above average in his gross motor skills. Already he was climbing things that made the ex-Hokage want to pull his remaining hair off his head. Weren't children supposed to crawl before they ran? He remembered Kushina as a kid and prayed that the boy took more after his father, though from what he remembered, Minato was a bit of an idiot as well. In battle, he was a sublime tactician and impeccable fighter. Outside, holy kami, was he clueless. Not in village matters, there he was a shrewd politician, and he knew people and believed in them in a way that Sarutobi in his jaded age couldn't begin to match. Minato was, well, he was naive. Kushina had been the more grounded of the two in terms of their worldviews. She'd lived through the destruction of Uzushigakure after all. Death on a grand scale and a betrayal to match. Hiruzen still considered that betrayal to be one of his greatest failings. Above even Orochimaru. Half of his mind was on the toddler, while the other half was consumed with recent events, having been prompted by his thinking of his 3 students. In his mind's eye, he could still see Tsunade's tears mixing with the spring rains as they stood in a standoff. He was sitting in his office in his compound, but the smell and sounds and memory was overwhelming. Everyone was tense, standing in a circle. The expedition to retrieve the last Senju was stuck in the awful hole of an area outside of Otafukugai called Shibumigai. Basically a huge ghetto. Why she was here Hiruzen never would know. This expedition was a position he never wanted, never could have imagined before the attack, a metaphorical blade to the throat of his student and her apprentice. Shizen, all of 10 years of age, in that lanky middle stage of teenage was also crying, sniffling with a ninja behind her, a hand on her shoulder. He could still see the mud on her knees where she was slumped on the ground. Hiruzen and his guard had caught the 2 of them in a ravine on the outskirts of Fire Country, bordering aim. Tsunade hadn't bothered running. She'd known who it was chasing her and why. Her beautiful face was a study in conflicting emotions, as she said herself. It was a fighting stance. The sight enraged him. She dared? After all that happened? She should have been grateful that he hadn't labeled her a missing nin and killed her. Enma emerged into existence from the staff in his hands. A staff he hadn't remembered summoning. The large hairy paw of his oldest friend clamped onto his shoulder as the old Hokage shook, his seemingly frail body, still corded with muscles even after 70 years, at the mercy of emotion a leaf on the wind. Biwako and Asuma were all he could see. Enma spoke in a rumble. Steady now, old friend. The little princess is hurting, same as you. He quieted the ghosts of Biwako and Asuma in his mind, listening to his friend. He ignored Enma and directed his question at his brashest student. Asuma and Biwako are dead. Did you hear? She nodded stiffly. I heard Sensei. I'm so sorry. You know I would understand, of all people. Would you, I wonder? They stared at each other, dark eyes meeting dark eyes. Tsunade looked away. I honor Biwako by doing my best to make her death mean something. She was a healer, a gentle soul, like yourself. Yet you wallow here and there, gambling, dishonoring your family by abusing your privilege, and above it all pulling Dan's niece from her rightful place in Konoha, her true family and yours. She grew visibly annoyed, then enraged at his words, hurt. Cut. Good. I question if you do understand what I'm feeling, Tsunade. You chase me here? Corner me like an animal? Capture Shizen like a criminal? She spat and scoffed, the sound echoing in the crevasse. He stared at her, trying to see inside her head. Her question didn't register. You don't consider yourselves missing me, Tsunade? She started to answer, startled. He cut her off, not wanting to hear her rationalizations. Do you know why I'm here, Tsunade? I can guess, old man. And the answer is no. Even more so now. She locked eyes with him, eyes wide. Beseeching. As if she wanted him to understand, and she didn't look away this time. I can't go back. I can barely stand the sight of blood or the sight of those rocks carved with the faces of people who believed in a sham. They were tools, same as everyone else. Tools to a system that doesn't give a shit that almost 7,000 people are dead from the Nine Tails alone. Dan and Nawaki are faceless marks on a stupid memorial wall. I refuse to be a part of that. The shinobi arrayed around her shifted in response to the honesty. No doubt they considered it weakness. What she was saying was sacrilege to someone who believed, as Hiruzen did, in the will of fire. Dan. And Nawaki, I can't see more pain, Sarutobi-sensei. Deal with more bullshit. I'm not fit to be a shinobi right now, maybe not ever again. Hiruzen was quiet for a second. Rain pelted down like saman, as it seemed to always do these past few days. The first name came out of his mouth like an accusation, growing in sound as he went, like a boulder rolling downhill to some inevitable stop. Minato is dead. Kushina is dead. Biwako is dead. Asuma is dead. Dan is dead. Nawaki is dead. Do you know who isn't dead, Tsunade? Every word a slap, she rocked back. The third Hokage motioned and a shinobi stepped forward, revealing he carried an infant in a covered basket. The shock of blonde hair, identical to Minato's wild locks, stuck out. Hiruzen continued drilling home with his words. Naruto isn't dead. And neither is Shizen. I'm reminded of the idea that the will of fire is more than just a creed to maintain the bond between one another, but to build a better world for those we leave behind. From pain, growth. Life before death, as all shinobi must agree. We walk with death every day and think deeply about our life. She looked pained as each word hit her. Do you agree? Tsunade shifted uncomfortably. And there is always someone to be left behind, isn't there? Unless we make it better? Sniffles emerged from the normally apathetic woman. Someday, we will be gone and we'll be left to be judged by the kami, and we'll be asked whether we did enough while we lived. I, for one, will not rest until Naruto is taken care of, till the leaf is taken care of, and everyone's future is secured. Hiruzen's voice hardened like steel being forged. He messed up badly. But he wouldn't fail this time. My time as Hokage is ended. I know this because I've made many bad decisions that will haunt me for the rest of my life, and this is the end of that road. You still have a chance to set the course of our history. Fix my mistakes. Make a better system for Shizen, Naruto, and the next Nawakis of the world. To heal what has been torn. Hiruzen stepped forward, chakra flexing subtly as he went. Be Hokage. Fulfill Dan and Nawaki's wish. Help me protect Naruto and raise Shizen in a real village strong with the will of fire, and people to help you. Rebuild the hospital. Form the Irionen Corp. Restore the greatness of our nation. Become what I know you can be with but a slight push. His voice was pleading. Tsunade's head was down as she listened, crying silently. Stop running, Tsunade. It's time to come home. If you don't, it will be Danzo, or the Seifuku-sha, Or that madman calling himself a god in aim, or Inoki the fence-sitter, or God forbid that savage warmonger I from Kumo dictating the kind of world we live in. And I will have to do everything in my power to prevent them from getting their hands on Minato's child. I only need you as Hokage until I've properly trained your successor. I need your help, Tsunade. Please. But Hiruzen knew he'd lost her. He didn't know where, but something he'd said had lost this battle for him. It was a full 2 minutes before Tsunade moved. Slowly at first, she stood spine undulating as she attained full height. She was angry, her fists clenched. Her voice was measured and slow, dangerous. Irrational. The eldest Sarutobi knew his men sensed it as they slid into stances. Hiruzen had to hand it to his student, she'd become more powerful, not less, despite her weaknesses. The pressure of her anger manifested in the feel of her chakra, like all strong ninja, a palpable thing. If you think that words will undo what I've lost, will help me forget, then you're more foolish than I gave you credit for, old man. Den believed in the possibility of the world you speak so wistfully of, so did Nawaki, and so did Minato. Now they're dead. I won't be taken for a fool. The world is broken beyond repair. Hiruzen sighed, right hand working on his cloak clasp. Within his tenketsu, his chakra surged with precision, priming his body for movement. The first, second, and third gates were primed for opening. It had been some time since he'd had to use them, to open them together, but he was familiar with their usage. He continued to work, and the cloak fell away after a second, taken by the breeze. Clad in his traditional battle robes and armor a dull matte black underneath, Enma collapsed back to his regular size, 6 feet of diamond hard metal with a last admonition, "Go easy on her, you foolish man." Hiruzen just shook his head, twirling the staff. Tsunade glared from opposite him, fists clenched. You want me to come home? You want me to be the whipping girl for Konoha and listen to old fogies argue, be a tool for state-sanctioned death and rape and destruction? To fix a broken world? Hiruzen nodded. It's the only place you can change things. But I suspect you'll need incentive to understand the stakes. Do you get it yet, slug princess? This isn't about you, this isn't about any one person, not anymore. For a true Hokage, it is never about the individual. That is leadership. We accept ownership of the responsibilities of power. You never understood it properly. Orochimaru did though, and that is ridiculous enough in itself to haunt me for all my days. She sneered. He looked away. You'll get what you need to make your first step. But I suspect you won't like it. It all happened in an instant. Tsunade reacted, the genjutsu so subtle she barely noticed it, dispelled internally with a rotation of chakra. Just in time, as she barely avoided a house-sized conflagration of white fire, done with no hand seals, water and earth techniques following it, following her, flowing, shearing through the ground like a razor. Splitting it open like so much rotten fruit, the water jets pushing up out of the ground powerful enough to drill through solid bedrock, narrowly missing her face. The greatest medical ninja in the world jumped and slid back, whirling, using every technique in her arsenal to avoid the massive chakra constructions as the world fell away into reality, revealing an empty clearing. No fire. No water. No shorn rock. She crowed, triumphant. Those tricks are beneath you, Sarutobi-sensei. Tsunade dropped into a deep crouch, stunned. What? Where Shizen had been kneeling, Sarutobi and Shizen appeared, hostage, a bloody kunai held rock steady in his grip. At the sight of the blood, she froze. Sarutobi smiled coldly. There was a cut on his liver-spotted arm still corded with tight muscles after all these years. Incentive. You spoke of this earlier. Danzo always accused me of being too kind, too unwilling to be a tool of my people, as all shinobi must inevitably be. Well, he'd be so proud of his old teammate now. Hiruzen drew the knife across the girl's carotid artery, slow, viscera parting under the well-honed blade. Blood arched through the air, painting the side of Tsunade's face. Wouldn't he? Shizen gasped, choking. The life-giving liquid emptying down the front of her clothes as Hiruzen kept her upright with a hand on the side of her neck. Tsunade vomited, crying out, a hand outstretched. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her mind almost refused to process the scene, but go through it piece by piece it certainly did. The slug summoner had mere milliseconds to understand the life of her ward, her niece. The most important piece of a life she'd left behind was slowly draining. Every pump of blood meant she was further and further from being saved. But the blood, Shizen! In an instant, the medical Nin, an S-class shinobi that had few equals in the world, went from frozen in fear to enraged hypermotion. The ground for 20 feet in either direction of her sandaled feet cracked and split as she launched herself into the fastest shunshin she'd ever achieved. There was no way she'd let this happen. No way. Katsuya! The summon didn't come. Hiruzen, Shizen, Katsuya, and the gathered group of shinobi, a small group of elite shinobi handpicked by the ex-Hokage specifically for this mission, watched as one of the legendary three, a name given by Hanzo the Salamander in their youth, a powerful ninja they looked up to and admired, fought shadows and light under the influence of a basic, albeit deeply layered genjutsu. What it showed was believable enough that Tsunade dove in headfirst and wrapped herself up in gossamer strands of deadly lies. Shizen, standing next to the sandame completely unharmed, was crying as she watched her aunt, closer than a mother to her, spiral into madness. Hiruzen looked down at her, turning Shizen's cheek to face him. Blotches of color stained her cheeks and it was obvious she was in pain. He couldn't tell whether it was from the trauma of the situation, although she couldn't see what he was projecting onto the slug summoner, or that her heart was breaking for her mentor. Shizen. Pay attention. This is what happens when one loses sight of what is important in our lives. The world becomes a dark forest from which we cannot see the moon to guide our way. Shizen, her face covered in snot and eyes reddened, reminded him of Asuma in his youth, crying after being beaten by his older brother Keiichi in a taijutsu spar. Hiruzen felt a pain in his heart that wasn't physical. The old Hokage cupped Shizen's face and turned her towards what was going on. They all had to face reality. In this way, we must look underneath to find our own moon. Our own guide to light on our path. He nodded to the Sannin with his chin. Tsunade has lost sight of why she became a shinobi in the first place, and she wallows in pain, runs away, instead of taking responsibility. Her not choosing, well, that is a choice and she doesn't understand that. All ninja must choose. To not choose is to choose. The will of fire means we face our problems. We face them with our comrades by our sides. He smiled at her, ruffling her hair, then sobered. Don't look away, okay? The girl nodded solemnly. Sarutobi followed the thread of his genjutsu and the reality he'd created, launching himself forward in a blindingly fast body flicker technique, appearing next to her in the perfect position, seamlessly translating his movement with that of what Tsunade saw in his made-up reality, as she reacted to his genjutsu, latching on to her speeding, dangerous fist by adhering himself to her wrist with perfect chakra control. With his hand stuck to the back of her hand like a limpet, he pivoted, sending her ungodly powerful fist down to the ground with a simple wrist flick while channeling elemental chakra. To her, he was sure she thought he'd teleported like Minato. But the amount of lightning chakra he was channeling into her body via the minute contact was enough to disable a tailed beast for an hour. Her fist detonated from the feedback of the enhanced blow mixing with his lightning chakra. Simultaneously, he flipped an internal switch on the second inner gate. These were the limiters on human strength and power. Only the most dedicated shinobi in the taijutsu arts could open even one of them. 3 was bordering on insanity. Guy could open all 8, but had been taught by his father. Sarutobi was self-taught, and could only manage 3. 3 would barely be enough to put her down as crippled as she was, but it was what he had. Gate of healing, release. All at once, his body gained phenomenal strength. He could feel it coursing through his veins, intoxicating and ready. Bones and muscles creaked with renewed power. Enma was also waiting, ready for the perfect moment. In one go, he swung the adamantine staff whilst channeling earth chakra through his feet, anchoring him for his swing, alongside the lightning, a feat of which he was mostly sure only he could do, empowering his muscles as well, in a perfect downward arc, body primed, all culminating in a textbook blow straight to Tsunade's temple. Staff connected, snapping her head to the side as she looked up at him in startled disbelief. Overbalanced, overextended, and attacking something that wasn't there, Swanda had been set up and she now knew it. The fact he even landed that was a testament to how messed up she was that she couldn't recognize a basic, though skillfully layered, genjutsu. Normally, she could disable the lightning chakra as well as recover from the concussive blow. Normally. Today, a day of emotional turmoil, it would be enough to knock her out for 6 hours at best. The second swing, a spinning backhanded strike, connected a second time, and with the solid sound of metal connecting with flesh, she hit the ground. Nobody moved. Blood mixed with rain. Grimly, he turned and walked away. She would either learn her lesson or fall further down a dark hole. He hoped it was the former. The shinobi around him were stunned and simply stared, Shizen included, crying forgotten, as he motioned to his guard. They leapt to obey, forming up around him. The rain had stopped, but Hiruzen picked his cloak up from where he'd dropped it and fastened it again, flicking the mud off with a simple water technique that scoured it clean. The jutsu was a mind-boggling display of power and control. Nobody even looked twice. The third Hokage paused, turning to speak to Shizen again. He gestured offhand to Riza, a chunin Yamanaka. There is a town less than a mile from here. Take her there with Riza's help. Ask for Hizachi at the Resting Dragon. He should be able to take care of her till she wakes. It won't be long. Hopefully, she'll have the headache to end all headaches to remind her she has a long way to go to surpass me. Hiruzen looked sad for a second. Shizen could see it in the set of his eyebrows and the wrinkles on his face. It was a face built for smiles, but there were none now. The look she thought she'd seen was gone in the next instant. Her mouth opens involuntarily. What should I, how should I, what do I say? We need her. Hokage or not. We need her with us. Tell her that. Despite her reticence, she can do all that I've said. I know she can. He turned to go. Goodbye, Shizen. Hopefully we meet again under better circumstances. The last parting memory with Shizen dissolved with a knock on his study door. A wave of his hand dispelled his crystal farsight technique. Back creaking as he got up, Hiruzen had an idea of who it might be as he opened the door and smiled gently at the silhouette standing in the threshold. You don't know how happy I am to see you, Tsunade. This was a very different person than when he last saw her. The next Hokage, the soon-to-be Godame Hokage of Konohagakure, stepped into the light scowling slightly, but it softened as she heard the snoring of the toddler. Little Naruto sounded like he was sawing on a log. Shizen, dark hair in a tight bob and looking considerably happier than the last time they'd spoken, bounded around past the two of them and ran up to the crib/daybed Hiruzen had put up and made cooing noises at the child within. Adults completely forgotten in favor of the cute baby with whisker marks. The two of them didn't speak and both simply watched Shizen and Naruto. We do it for them, don't we, old man? That's what you said? Hiruzen simply nodded. The last Senju let out a deep rattling sigh. She looked stronger, resolved as she met his gaze. No bruise where he'd struck her. That had probably healed a half an hour past when he'd given it to her. Perhaps it was the set of her shoulders, her straight posture. But she looked every inch a Hokage. Ready. She'd need it. Danzo was complaining about the Uchiha. Shursui and Itachi, prodigies that they were caught up in something big and they'd have to act quickly. Knowing Danzo as he did, he was no longer willing to countenance any breach of authority. He needed Tsunade to be ready. Fugaku and Danzo together were not someone they could fight separately. She spoke quietly, moving closer to the sleeping Naruto. I cannot take the hat from you, old man, not really. His hopes froze. The ideal world he pictured in his head fractured with that one statement like glass landing on the ground from a great height. He was quiet for a time, simply puffing on his pipe. He processed her statement. Konoha is a primed exploding tag. I need. She snorted. I'm aware. I haven't seen a single Uchiha. There are Hyuga wearing police force uniforms. What part of this doesn't seem fucking off? I know you need me. The recent septuagenarian snorted at the last statement. True. But I want you to know that, as usual, I tried my best, and as usual, no good deed goes unpunished. You need to know everything to put a stop to whatever is coming. But you must take the hat in order to help my plan come to fruition. I can't. I want to, but I can't. I'm still not over my hemophilia. I'm a mess, and I know it. You never should have beaten me, and I think we both know that. Hiruzen didn't say anything because she was right. He was slowing down in his old age and couldn't fight extended battles anymore. Tsunade practically growled the last part. Despite her hostility, Sarutobi stared at her, thinking. She was right. He shouldn't have beaten her. Tsunade in fighting form would have seen through every facade and trick he'd pulled. The Slug Princess was easily as strong as his first 3 gates, had access to numerous techniques that would have countered any move he could have pulled. Yet he beat her. Shizen looked back at her, concerned, so the greatest Mednin in the world lowered her voice. What do we do? Hiruzen simply looked at her, helpless. Another voice spoke from the darkness. Sensei, I've returned. The beauty of Mikoto Uchiha was that of a marble statue sculpted by a master artisan to suggest the warmth of life, yet entirely lacked her typical humanity. Today, here, she was coldly perfect, all sharp lines and angles that, instead of suggesting the femininity she'd been known for her entire life, screamed iron strength and lithe, powerful muscles. She hadn't always been that way, but the last few years had taken a toll on all of them. Mikoto the most out of them all. She melted out from the shadows on the wall, and handed a scroll to Hiruzen as she spoke. It was low, controlled, all emotion scrubbed from her voice. As if the imminent possible destruction of her family and entire clan meant nothing. Mikoto had told him herself that the only thing that mattered to her now was the village, Itachi, Sasuke, and Satsuki. Fugaku could hang, and he would. Report. They're gone. All of them. Clan compound is deserted. Hiruzen was stunned, still reading the scroll. How could this be? To where? Dead? No, I wish. To aim. The god Pain and this infamous man in red welcomed them with open arms. Tsunade and the Sandaime stared speechless. Who the hell was Pain? The man in red. Last words Minato ever spoke pertained entirely to the identity of the man in red, or the Seifuku-sha as the continent was starting to know him by his nom de guerre, the Conqueror. Hiruzen thought quickly. If Minato was right about Uchiha Madara being this red man, then whatever they wanted with a disillusioned army of Sharingan users could not be a good thing. A clan that betrayed its village deserved death. Hiruzen had to ensure he gave it to them. Do you know what this means, Mikoto? If Tsunade refuses to take the hat, now this makes it harder to make a case for you as my current student. The woman merely nodded. I understand. I'm prepared to do anything required to succeed. Hiruzen sighed, turning to Tsunade. Are you sure? No. I'm sorry. I can't do it. I'll stay and help safeguard Konoha, but I can't take the hat. And wait, Sensei? Hiruzen rolled his eyes. I agreed to take Mikoto on since, well, he paused, considering. Her status and abilities are her secret to tell. Suffice to say, I'm the best one to be able to teach her to control her new abilities since the nine-tailed attack. Tsunade looked disgruntled, but her face smoothed as she stared at Mikoto's blank expression. Clearly no one was going to be forthcoming about this big secret. Very well. The ex-Hokage drew himself up, looking every inch his almost 80 years of age. Danzo will become Hokage. I might delay him a year or two. I cannot stop him. In fact, I think it is best that I ensure he takes my hat. I will bargain with him to ensure Naruto's anonymity as a container. We must make him believe that Naruto is a regular orphan and not Minato and Kushina's only son, nor his status as an Uzumaki. The clever will put 2 and 2 and make 4. Hiruzen paced. He is to be just a container for the 9 tails. There are 3 powerful secrets wrapped up in one boy. The Uzumaki heritage will see him dead by itself. Minato's heritage will put him in a grave as sure as summoning the Shinigami. But the 9 tails, that will make them hesitate. All 3? It will make him the greatest threat to Danzo's continued rule, or his greatest tool. We cannot allow that by any means necessary. He looked at both of them in turn, one impassive, the other visibly struggling. Minato will understand that we have to do what is right for the village. Tsunade spoke up, thoughtful yet still unsure. Danzo won't want to give up a powerful weapon like a tailed beast container. But knowing he's the fourth son and an Uzumaki to boot? I think sending him away is the best we can do, anything else will draw attention. Mikoto moved forward to stare off into the side room where Shizen played with Naruto, booping his nose and making cooing noises. The Uchiha spoke without looking at them, no doubt thinking of her daughter and eldest son. I was able to decipher, finally, with the tablet in our clan's secret rooms with this, she vaguely motioned to a dark eye with long lashes. A prophecy on the tablet spoke of the Samsara Eye of legend. That a descendant of the sage would awaken it. Ganamaru, Jiraiya said, spoke of it either destroying the world or saving it, from what he didn't say, nor did he indicate which outcome he thought more likely. Fugaku has the same sort of access to the eye that I do, he's hoping Sasuke will awaken it. There is a rumor that Amigekure has a Rinnegan wielder. I suspect it is part of the reason for the split, and why Fugaku went to the Land of Rain. That, and the general unhappiness that has plagued the Uchiha for so long. There is debate on whether descendant refers to spiritual or physical. Uchiha or Senju, and we know it's not Senju. Tsunade and Hiruzen looked at each other, considering what to say. Prophecy? Prophecy was usually rubbish, but this was Mikoto who continued on another tack, speaking of Naruto. Minato and Kushina both spoke to me of prophecy and I dismissed it, but now I believe there is far more at work in our world than we've ever credited. I am reluctant to give up any tools at our disposal, even my own sons and daughter, such use that they'll be at a later date. But we do what we must. She nodded to Hiruzen. You taught me that, sensei. Hiruzen sat back in his chair, crossing the room. Mikoto leaned into the desk, palms down, speaking. Dye his hair black like an Uchiha's. Place him at Sasuke's. I'll have my new minions watch over Naruto for you until a better solution appears. Sarutobi slowly shook his head. Mikoto frowned, obviously thinking quickly. Tsunade looked pained. Is there no other way, sensei? Can't you take him? But the old man was already firmly shaking his head. No. There will be too much to do and so little time. Anonymity must be his armor. Sasuke's it is, that much we agree on. As Orochimaru, Akatsuki, and Danzo comes first, then this mysterious man in red. When Jiraiya is back in the village and I deem it safe and Danzo has agreed to my terms, then we will see what our options are for Naruto. Mikoto frowned. That will be too late, sensei. I have a better idea, one that will. Well, it will be best for Naruto, I think. Kushina and Minato would have understood. Hiruzen frowned. Tsunade looked troubled. Mikoto drew a deep breath. Dyeing his hair, for a long duration, is a start. That bright blonde is too distinctive. But longer term. The Uchiha matron eyed Hiruzen's wall-sized decorative cartographer's copy of the known world, indicating a tiny stretch of land between Iwa and Kumo. Those were two of Konoha's biggest enemies. What do either of you know of Iron Country and a man named Mifune? Chapter 2, Like an Old Friend. Shino, sitting Kage of the Land of Sky, was still amazed at how small everything looked from 40,000 feet above the continent, especially this early in the morning. He watched for his favorite moment, and there it was, a beautiful kaleidoscope of colors burst in the sky as morning greeted the world, cresting the horizon line. Phenomena that he was sure very few were able to see, as it was a view only afforded from this height. Anchor Vantion, his pinnacle creation and his pride and joy, floated above the Bay of Heron off the coast of the Land of Hot Springs. He could see capped peaks of Kumo and the edge of water country, though that was mostly mist and rippling water. Perspective, an actual perspective of the land such as it was, gave Shino all of his best ideas, medical, technological, and political. Floating like this, lounging and staring for hours out the clear viewing panes, had given him the idea for this joint venture. Chaos was a ladder, as he'd found, and the best way to climb it was to create it. The powerfully built medical genius had been only another pawn a few years ago, but recently the population of Sky, such as it was, had gotten themselves organized. Shino was tired of wallowing in the misery and disarray of a poorly funded village living on the literally fringes of the elemental nations. The economic fallout of the Third Shinobi War was still felt in every starving orphan and every overfull jail cell. The Seifuku-sha had come to him, encouraged him, and he returned home from traveling to grab the reins of power. As a new Kage, he couldn't sit and wait for conditions to improve when sanctions on them by the Alliance made it difficult to contribute their vast Fuin-based technology as a mercantile pursuit. The new Hokage of Konohagakure had made things even more difficult with a new round of sanctions specifically meant to curb competition. So, Shino reached out to a deep contact in the daimyo's court. Chakra metal ore was mined at an astonishing rate, and with technological help from Sky, well, the partnership proved profitable. Despite that, conditions hadn't improved as dramatically as he'd wanted in his village. The suicide rate had gone up 45% in the last decade, and wasn't that a crazy number in a village full of merciless killers? The door sliding open behind him made him sit up and turn. The person who entered, catching him in a black mood, caused him to snap a little sharper than he intended, despite the fact he was not unexpected. "Ah, how gracious of you to join me, Orochimaru of the Sannin. Or should I address you by title now, Shodai Odokage?" A flat look from reptilian slits and a thin smile met Shino as his first guest entered the room. The room had gone noticeably cooler. Had they been lesser ninja than the two currently occupying the Spartan conference room, there might have been drawn blades. Luckily, this was merely an opening salvo, and his other more sensitive guests were not here yet. It was fairly difficult to enter a fortress floating 40,000 feet in the air without notice, overall. He brushed off his idle thoughts. The view always did that, scattering his thoughts to larger concerns, and focused himself back on his current pursuits. For Shino, a patient and precise man, this whole undertaking, the Alliance, was a labor a decade in the making, and Orochimaru of the Sannin was notorious for his ability to throw the unexpected wrench into carefully laid plans such as his latest failure in the Land of Water, and this massive joint venture into the Land of Fire. He simply did not have time to play nice with a man, if you could call him such as this. And his next guest was even worse. Well, what is Pain and Seifuku-sha's take on the situation? Orochimaru simply looked away without answer. Shino don't know. Where are the others? So, the direct route, and he didn't answer the question. Interesting, was there a problem brewing? They should be here momentarily. My ninja are ferrying them to Anchor Vantion as we speak. Good. There are developments we must speak of. Pain is upset that we did not consult him regarding the 9 tails housed in iron and has special instructions regarding our plans. Shino felt a momentary wave of anger, and then panic. This meeting and the mobilization of the Zero and Sky and the collaboration with the smaller countries and Orochimaru was only possible through Pain and Akatsuki, and their agent in Leaf and Iron. Would it all be for naught? All for a stupid boy that every spy agreed was actually worthless, playing with Fuinjutsu and stuck in those caves like a troll? Why did the Seifuku-sha even need the 9 tails? Yes, it was powerful, but the man himself was on another level. Shino gripped the back of one of the conference chairs, feeling the leather creak under his strong grip. He fought his anger and panic down. All wasn't for naught. His people needed him. They could still deal with Konohagakure without other support. He'd have to see to it personally, though. His grip eased. It was doable. As long as Pain kept Jiraiya busy in aim, that is. That was the kicker. Akatsuki is withdrawing support for our operation because of a miscommunication? Is that it? Orochimaru smiled in a way that made him think he knew the direction of his panic thoughts, and they struck intentionally awry. The man was amused. Arrogant snake. His compatriot sat, adjusting his green silk kimono, seemingly more at ease than when he came in. Hardly. He's given me explicit instructions for my agent to smuggle the Jinchuriki out of iron before we lay waste to the Leaf. He has plans that require the bijou unharmed. He cannot afford to wait for the Ninetails to reform if the vessel is destroyed. This is what he wants us to ensure, that nothing happens to the boy during Seifuku-sha's operation. As such, he will send one of his most trusted Akatsuki to ensure a safe delivery, as my sensei has Mifune, of all people, guarding the boy, and presumably training him. Shino carefully sat again, leaning back into the chair as he considered Pain-sama's request. It wasn't unreasonable. It was a badly kept secret that the Leaf kept the strongest bijou for themselves. And it was somewhat tactless to go after the 9 without alerting Pain, considering. He wasn't unopposed to letting Orochimaru take this burden off his hands. Shino just prayed to the sage that Orochimaru wouldn't let any of his numerous schemes influence his judgment. Could he afford to leave this important task to Orochimaru? The real question was, if he didn't, could he afford to take his eye off the prize for a worthless kid? Orochimaru continued. He asks that we infiltrate and secure the target before Seifuku-sha attacks. I will do this as I know Sky isn't known for their subtlety, and we don't want to tip our hands just yet or disappoint Pain in this joint venture now, do we? Shino scowled, but smoothed his face as a knock came at the door. A Skynin opened the door and held it open for the rest of his guests. Shino beckoned with one hand. They were a bit early, but within parameters. He pasted a smile on his face. Come in, come in. He eyed the green-clad snake's lack of reaction as 3 new arrivals filed in the door. The leader of Sky made introductions, standing and striding to the door, gripping each man's hands. All of the men, minus the auburn-haired Leafnin, eyed Orochimaru at the foot of the table as if he was a live exploding tag, and that wasn't a shock to Shino. None of the 4 new arrivals had reason to like the notorious missing Nin, as his experiments had already unduly affected the small countries represented here more so than the big villages. But the Leaf Nin, a representative of their agent inside Konoha, didn't blink an eye. That bore some thought. Grass, a quite unexpected addition, wind, and river, all the allies involved that he'd personally secured technology trade deals with, minus Akatsuki, were present. Perfect. Hello Tamachi, Baki, Bami, Fu, friends old and new, welcome to Anchor Vantion. Please have a seat and we'll get started. Skynin filed in with drinks and light refreshments, placed before each member. All 3 nodded as they watched the service and found seats at the conference table. Orochimaru folded his hands and stared as a faded blue 3-dimensional map of Konohagakure sprang into life above the table, startling everyone but the purple snake. Shino smiled inwardly at the others. The powers of the old Fuin technology were always startling to those not well versed with it. His slow distribution of technology had leapfrogged the continent's infrastructure and travel 100 years. Cars, for instance, changed everything. Chakra and the batteries that held non-elemental chakra were game-changers. Only he controlled the sources. Let's get down to business, shall we? Shino clicked a button on his remote, and the scenery shifted to a geopolitical map of the elemental nations, minus one important feature. As you all know, medical ninjutsu is my specialty, and as such I had to train as a regular doctor in order to understand some of the effects of my jutsu. I traveled extensively, learning, seeing various ailments, some of which beggar belief. Shino zoomed the map in a little bit, closer to Fire Country. One of the things they teach you in places where there isn't a lot of resources to spend on medicine is that sometimes, when the infection spreads, you must cut it out if you cannot save it. He paused, considering. Crude, but necessary to save your patient oftentimes. And the patient. The map blinked red and Fire Country dissolved, several other countries rushing in to fill the space in a diagonally lined area demarcated as a coalition demilitarized zone. Is everything. The Hidden Leaf Village is a cancer of malignant and giant proportions. We. Shino made eye contact with each one in turn, lingering longest on Fu. Must cut it out to save our nations. I'm sure you'd agree that we tried to curb the excesses of the powerful here. Multiple heads nodded, smiling slightly. He noticed Fu didn't smile or change in any way. The stillness bothered him more than the dumb enthusiasm from the others. Shino continued. Let us discuss a world without the blight of a Konohagakure after we finalize our plans to eliminate them, yes? Coldly pleased, the small group leaned into the map. Shino felt satisfaction well up and ruthlessly suppressed it, moving forward and clicking his remote. The scenery on the map moved slightly, bright lines of attack bubbling up on screen, all converging on the village hidden in the leaves. One line went right through the capital of Fire Country, detonating it in a shower of pixels. The demarcated area slowly filled with thick red lines. Shino paused, looking at each member in turn. This is Phase 3, and as such, the Leaf Village will be nothing less than a distant, unpleasant memory when we are finished. But Shino held a finger up, waiting, then pointed at a specific member, the representative of the most unpredictable faction here, and smiled. Was there such a thing as a quadruple agent? Thanks to Fusama, Phase 1 will begin with a weeding out of obstacles before our final push. Konohagakure, village hidden in the leaves. Land of Fire. Hiruzen Sarutobi. Shimura Danzo, as Sarutobi knew him, was above all else an opportunist. That meant, in most scenarios, Hiruzen could predict with reasonable certainty that at any given time, Danzo would do the most practical and pragmatic action in response to outside stimuli. For instance, in response to the crisis in the Bloody Mist, he'd sent their Special Operations soldiers, a subdivision of the current ANBU, to bolster the resistance in order to continue to maintain the instability, if not an outright dissolution of government. An unstable mist meant a more stable Western theater. A busy mist was one that took in less contracts and provided less resistance when Fire Country mined for various special minerals required for the latest technology, or cut into their lumber supplies. However, he was savvy enough to realize that if the rebels won, we didn't receive nearly enough benefits from a weakened mist to make their success a desirable outcome. The best thing to do long-term was to ensure they bled enough on both sides that they had no bargaining power to do anything at the end. A careful balancing act. Too much help and they won handily, too little and we see a continuation of the bloodline purges and a surge in disruption to supply lines near tea, sky, iron, and the sea lanes. Then this Seifuku-sha happened. Hiruzen had accumulated this knowledge about Shimura Danzo from a lifetime spent working alongside him, in a 3-man Jonin squad with Tobarama-sensei, and later when Danzo acted as his chief advisor in matters in foreign policy, as he enacted plan after plan. Some went well, others did not. But Danzo had always learned from them, in one fashion or another. Danzo and Hiruzen had balanced each other well over numerous conflicts, and Konohagakure always emerged stronger, for such was their partnership. The yin and the yang. The fiasco with the Uchiha was one said plan that went terribly awry. To be fair, it was one of many bad solutions to the mess Tobarama Senju had created in the hamstrung Uchiha police force, and compounded by the suspicions that most people had about the Nine-Tailed Massacre, an event that changed the course of Fire's history forever, and saw Hiruzen back wearing a hat he'd been thoroughly done with. How right they were to suspect the Uchiha, he thought uncharitably. It was unfair because how could you fault a wild animal for fighting back when cornered? He knew part of the fault lay with him, and that galled him. Mistakes on mistakes. Yet, Hiruzen could only do his best to give the Uchiha the rewards they'd rightly earned, despite their ancestors' crimes, through an almost century of rock-steady loyalty. Still, there had been no Uchiha Hokage, and he was sure that rankled. When Danzo had sent a messenger to him in the early morning of the newest graduation exam, he hadn't thought much of it. They, meaning Danzo and his advisors and the Jonin commander, had not settled on exact teams or even finalized all Jonin sensei yet. He surmised they might need him as a consultant, as they often did, on delicate matching of personalities to abilities, a specialty of his after honing it for 4 decades of open and clandestine warfare. It was akin to setting the course of the village for the next decade to decide these teams. Hiruzen's mind was, regrettably though, on nothing more than his apprentice's hope for success in the succession vote as he strode into the marble and wood lobby of his once home, the bustling nerve center of the village, the Hokage Tower. Yet centuries of battle-trained, honed instincts told him that something was off in the way the attendants, shinobi teams, and administrative assistants eyed him as his sandals clicked on the floor, striding past the Chunin on watch and into the main elevator. Perhaps it was in the hooded way every one of the ninjas in the room subtly tried to pretend they weren't staring at him like a fox in the henhouse. Yes, something was off. What was that symbol on that headband? Do I know a single one of these young shinobi? And Hiruzen was unpleasantly surprised to find that he couldn't be sure. Some looked familiar. But well, he'd been out of the game teaching Mikoto, communicating with Jiraiya and Tsunade, who'd taken over Konoha General, about outside events like Akatsuki, a new Nukenin group out of AIM, and attempting to recover from the massacre in a way that didn't seem like he was abandoning the memory of his wife and son. True, he hadn't spent much time directly assisting governance as he'd done in the past. He'd allowed Danzo leeway. And now, this butcher and mist complicating things. Yes, too much leeway by half. The sheer number of refugees flooding into Wave and Fire were astounding. Honestly, Hiruzen hadn't known that many people even lived in Mist. Several items came together in his head, things he'd been mulling about all morning, summarized in a single sentence that stood out of Jiraiya's last missive about the new village hidden in sound. New Kage. Snake. Orochimaru is on the move as Kage of Sound. That team down there had to have been sent from Sound. If that was the case, and their headband was proudly on display, it had to mean they were openly welcomed by the sitting Kage, Danzo. If Danzo was consorting with their greatest missing nin, Hiruzen's own former student, then things were much worse than he'd feared, and it was, in all likelihood, a trap he was walking into up there in his former office. He'd spent these long years maneuvering Mikoto in a position to smoothly take over from Danzo, and he knew this would be a possibility. How bitter a defeat that would be, though, struck down via treachery in the office he'd held for nigh on 5 decades, the longest sitting Kage in the history of Leaf. What irony. Luckily, Hiruzen didn't care much for irony or defeat, despite how fitting it would be to be taken out, at last, by his most genius student in concert with his childhood rival. Naruto, Mikoto, and Konohamaru still needed him. Konoha still needed him. The ding sounded from the elevator reaching its destination, and the door slid open soundlessly to a long hallway that led to yet another open T-shaped lobby. The door at the far end, past the Hokage's personal administrative assistant's desk, was covered in leaf, fire, and spirals from their long association with the now extinct Yuzushiogakure. But it was the door on the right that he was headed towards. Hiruzen cleared the hallway quickly, pushing on the door and ignoring Danzo's assistant, and the inane ramblings about propriety. If this was to be a trap, he would walk in without a care, prepared, ready, and primed to utterly melt the top off this tower. Literally. Incredibly pure fire elements swirled in his pathways, mixing with earth and mimicking, at great chakra cost when it was released, the volcanic Kekii Genkai of the five-tailed Gobi Jinchuriki. Almost every shinobi in history didn't have the proper understanding of what perfect chakra control really allowed one to do. If you really were good enough, skilled enough, you could squeeze your chakra pathways to subtly increase pressure and strength of a prime technique. Danzo would find out how destructive a true master could be very quickly if he turned on him in this meeting. When my dear sensei gets here we can start the meeting. Ah, I think I hear him now. You did assure me I'd be safe, Godame Hokage? Of course, Orochimaru Dano. You have my reassurance. Hiruzen opened the door and took his time entering. He knew what was awaiting him on the other side. It took all of his considerable emotional control and discipline to not immediately release a devastating blast of molten lava as one of his greatest mistakes was smiling at him from less than 10 feet away. Hiruzen, please. Before you say anything, Orochimaru is here as a visiting Kage. Please restrain yourself. Diplomatic immunity is inviolable here. We are here to meet urgently about things that concern both our villages and our world. Orochimaru shifted, eyeing his former sensei warily. Hiruzen couldn't help but let out a snort of ironic disbelief. His student was wary of him? I cannot believe that we must get in bed with those who perform illegal, inhumane medical tests on children for any reason. He stared kunai at the snake in their midst. To do so is to become everything we hate about the lengths shinobi go to for power that countries go to for power. Do you not agree, my old friend? Or have you fallen further than I'm willing to believe? Danzo scoffed, his hat, crowned with the kanji for fire, dipping as he shook his head. My friend, you have no idea the scope of the threat we face. I stoop as far as I must to safeguard the roots of the great tree. The bandaged Kage gestured with a hand. My fellow Kage from Otogekure brings me news that Jiraiya has confirmed in the missives you've forwarded me. Akatsuki moves for the Bija. But not only that, Black Salamander Hanzo is dead. Killed by this. Pain fellow with apparently frightening ease. Danzo stared, pleading his case in a way that sounded nothing like pleading, into the head of the Sarutobi clan eyes. Wide-eyed with almost panic. He wields, if our local intelligence is to be believed, the legendary dojutsu of the sage. The Rinnegan. I assure you this is not the time to shun allies. Sky is on the rebound with ancient, forbidden technology. Fa meets with them as we speak. We will need help to combat this threat. Help? Hiruzen couldn't help but interrupt. The Rinnegan was troublesome, if true. Yet, for all they knew, it could be a false trail given by elusive Akatsuki agents. Jiraiya was being run in circles by a spy master who dwarfed his skills with no idea as to whom it was that defied him. That terrified Hiruzen, who relied far too heavily on reports from his most irresponsible student. Well, who could tell which one was which? If those reports were unreliable at best. Help is assembling a 5 Kage summit to deal with such a threat. Help is calling up the Chunin battalions and fast-tracking the academy training. Help is contacting our allies in Suna, Iron, and the smaller countries. Help is not getting in bed with our greatest missing nin. What is your game here? Danzo was silent for a moment. I've left you and the missing container alone for many years, have I not? Hiruzen got a sick feeling in his stomach at the quickly switched tack. He knew where this was going. You have left us alone because I supported your bid for Hokage. Without me you would not be wearing that hat, Danzo. Hiruzen took a deep breath, still feeling his pathways filled with fire. It steadied him against the deep political riptides he saw coming his way. Battle, in word and deed, as ever, marked his path in life. I warn you now, both of you. Hiruzen spread his spiritual pressure on the room, his intent and purpose manifest like the suffocation inevitable at great depths. Both Hokage and Otokage felt it pressing them. With Biwako and Asuma are dead, I have very little left in my life that I cherish. I will level the city. He pressed a finger towards both of them, increasing the chakra presence, before I allow you to misuse those I have left to love. Tread very careful now, my old friend. Say your piece before I lose my temper. With that last statement, he eased up the pressure, vanishing the way it came. Danzo looked ruffled, irritated. Orochimaru showed no sign of his previous discomfort. Danzo spoke up. Despite your care and considerable experience as a sensei, and despite the reports assuring me he is well taken care of, the boy is, by your own admission, no closer to mastering the dormant power of his bija. In fact, by all reports, you've shuttered him up tight, almost unable to reach out to the power except in tremendously dire circumstances. Isn't that correct? Considering that Naruto was in iron, being watched over by the immense might of the samurai and his good friend Mifune, this was too much information for Danzo to rightly have. Hiruzen shouldn't have wondered how Danzo had gotten that information, but he did. It implied much, especially who was sitting in the room. Specifically, that Danzo had someone he trusted close to Naruto in the land of iron. A casual encounter on a street wasn't enough to glean that info, but an instructor, one that worked closely with Naruto, yes, that would be enough contact to parse that knowledge. Quickly, his brain was putting together disparate pieces to form a picture he didn't like. You are correct. I wanted Naruto to have full control over his shinobi abilities before I let him tamper with Tailed Beast chakra. I'm told the 8-tailed Jinchuriki from Kumo did much the same when he was a genin. He began learning when he made Chunin. This path forward is the best way to produce a perfect Jinchuriki, and not just a container. That was what you wanted, yes? Naruto isn't even of age to start the academy, let alone the new academy structure you've introduced. Danzo nodded, thoughtful. This is no longer the path I'd like to take with the container. Hiruzen paused at Danzo's words. Our timetable must be accelerated. Everything must be accelerated because there is a war coming to the elemental nations. The land of sky are back. You wonder where all the new technology is coming from? We have our answer. Orochimaru just came from a meeting with Shino. They've apparently joined with the 100,000 kingdoms from the western continent. Hiruzen was reeling from the news. Sky? Shino? The 100,000? Akatsuki? And what part did the man in red, possibly Madara Uchiha, the Seifuku-sha, play in all of this. He needed to leave. Needed to regroup. What did you mean when you said the timetable for his training must be accelerated? I should think that is obvious, Hiruzen. He's our best chance at surviving the largest war the five have ever seen. I've sent ANBU operative Kino to bring Naruto to us. He is uniquely suited to doing so. Isn't that right, Orochimaru? The snake smiled and nodded. Kino is it now? Well, I gifted him a weakened version of the dear Shodame's bloodline limit. I'm happy to hear he's doing well. Hiruzen stood, slamming his palms on the table which started to deform under his fingers, exposed to molten heat. You better pray that Kino touches not one hair on Naruto's head. Danzo simply looked at him, impassive. Pray, dear Hiruzen, that he comes quietly. All of Konohagakure will have to change to meet the new threat. I'm putting every shinobi of fighting age on alert. This is a military village, and it will act like it. I'm taking full and direct control of everything as of now. I'm pairing with Suna and Oto, and we will form a coalition force that will dwarf any the world has seen. Orochimaru has promised his cursed seal foot soldiers as shock troops in any upcoming conflict. You said it yourself that Naruto can only call up his latent powers under dire circumstances, correct? Surely you can see. Hiruzen had heard enough. Danzo was enacting the war clause on his position and taking direct control. That meant Hiruzen would have no say over Naruto's status as a weapon of war, nor would the maneuvering he'd done with the Jonin Council ensure a proper succession to Mikoto from disastrous Danzo. Jiraiya was out of the village, Tsunade was head of Konoha General and refused to do anything for him, let alone get her hands dirty because of hemophilia. Nobody even knew this was coming. Which was why they'd invited him. Because Naruto would be unprotected, despite him being in the center of samurai influence and Mifune's grasp. Mikoto was the only person who knew half of what he did about the full picture, her and Jiraiya. Somehow, that didn't engender relief, merely dread. She wasn't ready to take over. If the boy needs danger, well, I decided to give him some incentive. It was this realization that broke him out of his contemplation to realize a powerful genjutsu was reaching out to him, snaring him. Orochimaru was already in motion, but the lightning chakra that Hiruzen had added to his veins empowered his reflexes and his neurons fired at 3 times their normal speed. First, the genjutsu. The genjutsu was skillfully applied in a net that would have snared him at any time in the last decade when he'd let himself go. But he'd been honing his skills against both his remaining students, sometimes both together, just for this moment. His twilight would come later. Now, he'd show them why he was still the god of shinobi. Molten lava, not a product of Kekkei Genkai, but simply molten earth, poured from his pores, filling the room with thick black smoke as volcanic lightning lashed out in a horizontal jagged blade of light bisecting Danzo with a hiss of cauterized, superheated meat. Or rather the log he'd replaced himself with. Orochimaru twisted supernaturally, like a squeezed dish rag, and landed sideways on the rapidly melting wall of the conference room. Orochimaru looked frustrated and angry as he couldn't spot his old sensei through the obscuring clouds of ash. Sarutobi coated the bottom of his sandals with water chakra and used wind to skate on the lava that was searing through the floor below him rapidly, melting the chakra-hardened tree beams that the Shodame built the Hokage Tower and most of the surrounding structures out of. Hiruzen navigated solely by virtue of his ability to sense chakra. Monkey King Enma, boss summon of the Sarutobi clan, materialized in his hand as a bow's staff and proceeded to shear through the rest of the walls like tissue paper. He narrowly missed Orochimaru, who was attempting to flank him and had blown most of the ash away with a wind release. Great breakthrough, leaving the office clear of the ash and smoke. The ceiling had started to collapse behind him, but he needed to make the retreat a little more annoying for his old student. Fire spewed out of his right palm as he used half-seals to speed things up, water pouring out like a dam unleashed via the other. Steam covered the room and obscured Hiruzen's quick exit to find his true prey. Extending his senses barely a dozen feet led him to his quarry. He needed to eliminate Danzo quickly in order to secure Naruto's future. This would be a long and costly fight if he fought both of them. Hiruzen used Enma to create an opening into his old office and barely heard the intruder alarm blaring all over Kanehigakure, indicating a foreign shinobi intrusion. The former Kage summoned a small capuchin monkey. Ryukang, go to Tsunade. Tell her to coordinate with Jiraiya and Mikoto. Danzo has gone mad. He's going to try to take Naruto. He knows he's in iron. No doubt to turn him into an emotionless rude agent. I'm not sure how far he's gone down this dark road, but he's got Orochimaru working alongside him. Ryukang gulped, his tail flicking back and forth. That it, boss? Damn. That's a load and a half. You gon' be alright? Hiruzen raised an eyebrow at the foot-tall monkey. He'd been hanging Enma's cousin Taolong too much, that was for sure. Go, Ryukang. I can handle these two, and I'm trusting you with Naruto's life here, which is far more important. The small monkey puffed out his chest, showing his flak vest, and straightened, saluting perfectly. Got it, boss. Ryukang scampered away, out a window that was not on fire. Danzo was hiding a room over, and it was time to end this madness. One gnarled hand undid his casual robe, revealing his battle attire, the same attire he'd fought Tsunade in. Hiruzen Sarutobi, ex-Hokage of Kanehigakure, smiled grimly. Enma swirled to full stature next to him, a massive behemoth of a monkey, more akin to a muscular stature than true monkey. Let's hunt a Kage, shall we? Enma roared, chakra-lace sound waves shattering the wall ahead. Danzo, face me, you coward! A sword took a handful of hair off his head as he ducked. His former students strode through the flaming wreckage of the conference room while brushing stray bits of dust off his purple kimono. The legendary sword Kusanagi retreating back to a manageable length. Foo. My dear Sarutobi. Did you think I'd let you end my inspiring partnership with your old teammate die such a quick death? Hiruzen gritted his teeth and leaped forward in a blur, alarms blaring in the background. The alarm was the signal. Root and regular ANBU was on the move towards specific targets. The clans, led by Sarutobi Hiruzen, were rebelling against the sitting Kage. Operation Future Safe was greenlit. Kino, agent of Root, knew it was time for his part to start. Kanehigakure, village hidden in the leaves. Land of Fire. Inoichi Yamanaka. The Yamanaka clan district never failed to lift Inoichi's spirits every time he came home. Begonia, lilies, orchids of every kind, tree after unique tree, a veritable field of flowers and plants grew on the artificial terrace gardens that it seemed like every Yamanaka had outside their houses. The tan and beige architecture lent itself to a very tight feel, with cottages catty-corner to other cottages, but the gardens balanced it all, like all good flower arrangement should. Yin and yang, as in all things. Folk came from all over the elemental nations to witness the festival bloom in the Inoichi clan compound. Magnificent. Inoichi. It was important, he felt, as someone who spent his life focused on the analysis of disparate data sets, that you bring art to science and science to art. Therefore, it was his encouragement as clan head that everyone does their best to balance their gardens and the various kinds of plant life they contained against their modern conveniences. So far, it had worked. Inoichi. It also helped that he used several green sight techniques in conjunction with his mind-body jutsu to keep watch on his people and their extravagances. Just in case. Inoichi. His wife Ami had practically shouted that last one in his ear. It was uncharacteristic of him to be so distracted. But he couldn't put his finger on why he felt strange about today. It wasn't just that his daughter had passed the academy exam. He knew she was well qualified in the technical arts, perhaps not so much in the physical skill set. That would change. It was something in the air. A smell he couldn't pinpoint. Well, not a smell per se, a feeling? I'm sorry, Ami, I've been thinking about work. They both watched, seated on their deck overlooking their gardens, as Ino ran around chasing a pink-haired girl. Ami had been setting up a graduation party for her nephew, stepping away for a moment to speak with him. She took her duty as host very seriously as they watched her using chakra to move at high speeds around the house tidying up. Inoichi looked back at his wife. Ami was still a beautiful woman. I still don't see why Ino doesn't invite Ami as well as Sakura. She's being incredibly rude. A little older looking than when they'd first met perhaps, but she was still possessed of that same regal bearing and fierce intelligence he'd fallen in love with. He was less in love with it when it was turned against him, however. It occurred to him she trailed off again, looking at him in consternation. I know how dedicated you are to your work in Noichi, but your daughter is passing a critical point in her life and you need to be present for it. Not just here. Work will be there tomorrow. She had a point. There was always work to do as head of analysis. Yet there was something bothering him about the air? The smell? The feel? What was it? Rummaging in his coat, he pulled out Ino's graduation gift from one of the wide side pockets. Ami smiled when she saw it. She knew he was going to give it to her. It was an old, dog-eared field guide to important plants specifically tailored to shinobi needs. She'd find it as helpful as he had when he became a genin. His father had handed it to him after his graduation. Ino would need it if she was to pursue her dream to be a medical ninja. No. And Noichi realized it as he worried on the problem like a dog with a bone. It wasn't something that was bothering him, the problem was his perception of the outer alarm seals on the compound. Or lack thereof. She's going to love it, Inoichi. I don't think you could have picked a better gift. In fact. Inoichi cut his wife off, but a loud, single-note alarm went off above their heads. The foreign intrusion alarm was coming from the Hokage Tower. Yet there was no sound from inside the house from where Ino had been. Foreign intrusion or civil unrest? Was this what Hiruzen had warned him of? Ino! Stay where you are, Ami! But... I mean it. Stay where you are. Ino! Pumping his chakra, he entered the house quickly, searching the modest house for his daughter. The search took him a minute, but it confirmed exactly what he'd suspected. His daughter, his only child, was gone. Ami met him in the living room holding a tanto loosely in one hand. Ami, gather the elders. She nodded, mouth tightening. Yamanaka Ami was a master of emotional control. Ino is gone? But why? Who would take her inside our own village? I think it might have been the Hokage. Danzo? But why? She's 7. It's unnecessary. We're loyal Leaf Shinobi. Inoichi sighed, rubbing his temples. We've been receiving reports of war on the horizon. My only guess is that Danzo is doing something he feels will turn the clan heads against him, and he's seizing leverage for his war operations as the Uchiha left, and it leaves him on shaky ground in regards to the other clans. I need to meet with Shikaku and get word to Hiruzen. Only then can we formulate a coherent response. Mikoto might be needed. Ami nodded wordlessly, pressing her forehead against his chest. Just bring our daughter home, okay? I'll mobilize the clan while you meet with the Nara and Akimichi. I will. Kanehigakure, village hidden in the leaves. Land of fire. Shikaku Nara. Now, they most likely hadn't anticipated the development of four-wheeled moving objects that now carried people and supplies back and forth from long-distant destinations, but it felt right to think his clan had thought that far ahead. Exceptional levels of multi-layered forethought were often considered the greatest tactical advantage the Nara possessed over their enemies. They'd been subtly outmaneuvering their enemies this way for literally hundreds of years. Yet, when he looked back, the Nara could not remember ever misreading any situation as badly as the one he found himself in. Shikaku stood in his daughter's empty bedroom and stared sightlessly ahead at the pictures of clouds and the lilac bed cover. The room still smelled like her too, grass and sweat. An alarm blared overhead. Every Leaf Shinobi knew what that meant. But he couldn't get over how badly he'd fucked up and how his daughter had paid for his carelessness. Shikaku. It's okay. We'll get her back. She's strong, just like Ino. A strong, warm hand clenched his shoulder. He's right. We don't have time for this. Shikamaru doesn't have time for this. Shikaku roused himself from his self-pitying hole, slapping himself slightly. We got this. Ino Shikacho, right? Let's grab Chuza and we'll take our kids back. And Noichi grinned like he was again his academy self. Let's kick some ass, and Nara? Shikaku nodded, a slight smile on his face. Danzo doesn't know what he started. But he will. I hope Makoto is ready. Inoichi watched as his words got his friend's mind working properly. They couldn't hope to predict, let alone intercept, their adversary's next move if they didn't have Shikaku. Shikaku carefully thought the first parts through, speaking out loud. We need to contact the Jonin commander, and contact the clan heads. Only the third and Jiraiya can stop Danzo as Hokage, and we need the Council of Clans to establish legitimacy for extra-governmental action by the Jonin. As well, the next step. Inoichi was nodding slowly. Makoto. Like it was even a question. Loath as he was to support an Uchiha, she was all they had. Was this even Danzo? Too many unknowns. Right. Then cut down the variables. It'll make the pattern easier to see. Let's grab Chuza, then we speak with Tsunade. She'll know how to get in contact with Jiraiya-sama. Both men overflooded themselves with chakra and leaped onto the roof of the compound through Shikamaru's window, speeding away towards the Akimichi district in a gray and red blur. Kanahigakure, village hidden in the leaves. Land of fire. Hiruzen Sarutobi. There is no possible avenue of escape from many of those techniques. How is he doing this? There must be some secret, Hiruzen thought to himself. 3 times the third had killed his successor with pinpoint jutsu, and even a lucky hit with Enma. Yet, Hiruzen had continued to follow Danzo through the top-melted infrastructure of the Hokage Tower, a hurried flight of punch and counterpunch. Katon and sometimes right-on chakra hot enough to melt steel charred and combusted wooden beams, and what might as well have been paper walls that had stood for a century. That tore at his soul, seeing the center of the Leaf Village being gutted. A place of veneration such as this deserved better, especially from a sitting Kage like Danzo. The two of them with Orochimaru thrown and left almost nothing of the top floor. But Hiruzen couldn't forget that he'd thrown the first jutsu. Hiruzen spun Enma in staff form in a rolling blur, as he batted Kusanagi away from his face. A great breakthrough technique hit him from the side, tossing him into a wall. Hiruzen hardened his skin with a hasty and unorthodox application of earth chakra as Danzo flowed into the opening that Orochimaru created for him. Hiruzen did his best to recover, fists and elbows a controlled storm of fist and back fist blocks. Countering Kusanagi required the use of Enma, and even Enma was slowly getting nicked by the legendary blade. He wouldn't last for much longer. Naruto was still out there, possibly in danger. Word would need to be sent to Mifune. Thankfully Konohamaru was with his father. Getting tired, old man? It is 2 versus 1 after all. The Godame and I are no strangers to high-level combat. Are we, Danzo-sama? Hiruzen countered the speech by slamming his palms together, and infusing the rush generation of feeble wind between his palms with explosively strengthened futon chakra. An omnidirectional wave of horizontal gale force winds blew both Danzo and Orochimaru away from him, and gave him space to plan and breathe. Danzo smashed his head into an opposed smoldering beam, his hat coming off, and Orochimaru responded by planting himself on a wall, looking at his sensei with mild amusement. I don't have time to keep playing with these two, the village needs me. You are both men ruled by passions that reach outside yourselves. The world will be better when I rid it of you both. Hiruzen's face didn't twitch out of a look of concentration as 25 clones appeared beside him. Stall them by any means necessary. The ex-Hokage avoided one vacuum spear, a cylindrical construct of futon chakra, then had to frantically pump his body full of chakra to enhance his speed as a dozen then 3 dozen spears headed for him. He was attempting to retreat, and it seemed that Danzo and Orochimaru both wanted him here. That made it important he disappoint them. For then 6 then 8 more wind release, vacuum spear, which looked like nothing more than wavy heat lines in the air, flew through the space his head had occupied, dodging by timing the chakra expenditure and his acute sensory capabilities. Ducking and spinning between columns of hardened air, the ex-Hokage managed to outmaneuver the remaining spears and close the gap between him and his longtime rival in seconds. This close to Danzo, within absolute striking distance of a simple arm's length, he should have seen the fear in his rival's eyes. Hiruzen had lost to Danzo only once in a spar in the long time they'd been teammates, and, he thought, friends. But this Danzo was like a whole different human being. Before he was open with Hiruzen about his clandestine activities, Hiruzen had sanctioned many of them. Now he was closed off. Before he was cold and calculating, sometimes waiting days to respond to something if his passions were stoked, and today he was feverish with intensity. The heat in his eyes bled off him like steam, and Hiruzen could just feel the frustration. But he wasn't afraid. That was an important detail. It didn't matter though. Hiruzen's opening came almost on the heels of their staring contest. Danzo struck out with a bandaged hand in a chakra-laced straight punch, and though it was textbook, it was reflexive and not thought out well. Hiruzen simultaneously launched a hand to push the punch astray, and he conjured Enma in staff form, pulling the head of the staff backwards. Everything that happened next happened quickly. The bandage-covered Cyclops' remaining eye widened as the adamantine staff broke the armored chest plate under Danzo's robes and explosively pushed through his ribcage, bone fraying and shattering under the tremendous force. Hiruzen had launched a point-blank, wind-encased strike that had no defense disclose. He watched as blood trickled out of Danzo's mouth, and the gnarled hands of his longtime rival went slack in his grip, body slumping on Enma's material form. Hiruzen continued to not think of the moral implications of what he'd done, murdering his oldest friend, and simply banished Enma back to the summoning realm. The question remained, where was Orochimaru? Danzo's body lay at his feet, and his eyes passed over the still form to survey the ruins they fought in. The ex-Hokage could still hear the shrill alarm over the village, and to his eyes, ignoring the fires that raged around him, the snap and crackle of burning wood 20 stories above the city. It was obvious the Hidden Leaf village was in disarray. The miles-long thoroughfare that led to the Hokage Tower was swarming with ninja and civilians. It was a panic that only a sitting Kage could fix. The Uchiha had left, and so had their police forces. But there was no Kage to fix this, as Hiruzen had just killed him. That was something he could help with, but first, priorities. Orochimaru came first. Hiruzen, battered and bruised, with 100 tiny lacerations and one large cut on his forehead, tore his cloak to shreds, throwing it to the side. It wouldn't help him at all and would slow him down in the air. The tower, if he remembered correctly, was almost half a mile high, roughly 2,500 feet. The average shinobi could break their fall fairly easily, but this height was dangerous for even a seasoned chunin. The leap of faith, or, as most jonin called it, what the hell are you fucking doing, was a challenge reserved for those who could utilize either earth chakra well or had dense enough chakra that sufficiently reinforced their skeletal musculature to a specific degree. The earth technique was low A rank, and only the densest of chakra could suffice for the second option. Hiruzen had been doing both since he was 15. Taking a breath to steady himself, he flooded his body with earth chakra, hardening his skin and reinforcing his bones. Then he did it again, but sent pure chakra to all parts of his body. It was very literally the only thing that saved his life, as a vacuum spear the size of a main-line sewer pipe blew his entire right arm off and sent him spinning up into the open sky with a sound like a clap of thunder. Barely conscious as he went through floor after floor, pain becoming his whole world after an eternity, the last thing Hiruzen saw as he fell was Danzo looking down on him with a smile. The smile fell away as startled surprise stole across a face attached to a head that tumbled away as 100 blades seemed to materialize inside his body, then viciously tear him apart in a massive spray of blood. Uchiha Mikoto, an avenging angel covered in his former best friend's blood, screamed at him from where Danzo had previously occupied with hand outstretched as he fell. He felt like he watched every emotion run through her face as she screamed in what felt like silence to him, and he couldn't help but regret that all he seemed to do, his entire life, was to apologize to Minato, to Jiraiya, to Tsunade, to Orochimaru for not looking after him better, to his dearest love Biwako. To Asuma, who was supposed to lead a long and happy life, his failures over and over flashed in Mikoto's eyes. "I'm sorry, girl. You'll have to right my wrongs and make your own way now." Biwako smiled at him, and he went to them both, her and Asuma. Finally, eternity passed before his eyes closed, and he finally hit the ground. Then nothing. Kanahigakure, village hidden in the leaves. Land of fire. Mikoto Uchiha. Corpses were still being found and the death toll calculated, rubble cleared away, and tears being shed. Yet, most of the influential people in Konohagakure's political machine were here, soot-stained and battle-weary for the most important decision, a decision they shouldn't have had to make just yet, but one they couldn't put off. They'd been attacked from within, the very foundation of Konoha rocked by a corrupt kage who had been dealing behind their backs for far too long, a man who would stoop to kidnapping the heirs and heiresses of the great clans to ensure continuity of rule. Mikoto was impressed with the balls of that man. She'd stood there, looking at the body of her mentor from what felt like millions of miles away and had to turn away. What she found when she peeled back the layers of bandages and cloth wrapping that man had left her, horrified and several tears slipping out against her normally iron control. Sharingan. The jujutsu of her family, ripped out and stuffed into any available space on the man's chest and arms. Hiruzen didn't know, and what he didn't know had killed him. Order! Order amongst the assembly. We here have a sacred promise to choose the future. The man speaking, Teruchi Namazaka, an elder Jonin statesman who'd been chairing these tribunals and assemblies for a generation, had almost snarled. Act like it! Most subsided, side conversations falling away and bodies shifted in plush chairs rippling outward from the center of the floor and rising to hit the back of the room in a steep climb. Every member had a seat that could see the throne-like chair opposite the door and the speaker's station at the center on a raised dais. Teruchi stood now, hands clasped in white-knuckled fury, and fairly shouted at the Jonin Council. Jonin, as was forgotten by many, was both a political station and a rank in their armed forces. The great clans had no Jonin presence save their heads, who were larger voting blocks because they were trustee holders of their subordinates' votes. As such, they were required to behave with a more dignified air. Right now, there was a buzz of agitation in the normal stoic group. Teruchi had had enough. A blast of air-infused chakra let out a sound like a bomb going off and it went dead silent. Our Hokage was a traitor, conspiring with another of our greatest traitors to bring us down from within. Danzo Shimura, may his name be damned for all eternity in Yomi, was legitimately elected and endorsed by one of the greatest Hokage we've ever had and who was betrayed and killed by his best friend Danzo Shimura. Teruchi seemed on the verge of tears. Tears of fury and sorrow they all shared, though some to a lesser degree than others. We now, though some of us are no longer here with us, must now choose our leader, the successor that must face a world eyeing us vulnerable, like a sheep alone in the meadow with no shepherd. They will have a monumental job ahead of them, and they must have all of our support. Powerful, savvy, wise, and most of all, skilled in the ways of shinobi and politics. Teruchi waited, eyeing each of them, resting a long time on Jiraiya, still wide as an autobus and with devil-may-care long white hair that was as famous as he and Tsunade, beautiful in her youthful blonde-haired illusionary technique, before moving on, taking as long as he needed to meet everyone's gaze. Inoichi Yamanaka stood up fiercely, still covered in some burns with rips aplenty in his normal pristine garb, but it was no faster than Jiraiya and Tsunade who both stepped forward. Inoichi looked unsure, but waved them on. Teruchi nodded to the remaining loyal members of what civilians called the Sannin. It had no real titled weight here, but their prowess as two of the remaining S-rank shinobi did carry the strength of sway. Jiraiya, the katakana for oil plain for all to see on his headband, spoke slowly and quietly, a rarity to those who knew him. Hiruzen's body wasn't even cold yet and they were here, replacing him. Jiraiya hated it. But it had to be done. This was about the future, and what would be left of Konoha without the right person at the helm. Jiraiya no Hai, for orphans had no right to a clan name and they took the moniker of the land they were discovered in, spoke powerfully, submit and endorsed that Hiruzen's personal apprentice, and his personal pick to follow Danzo Shimura as Hokage. Jiraiya looked at Tsunade, she nodded reluctantly. Be Mikoto Uchiha. A wall of noise sprang up. Protests, denouncements, and filth spewed around the room until Inoichi stood back up with a wordless growl that somehow, cut through the cries. I, Inoichi Yamanaka, clan head of the Yamanaka, endorse and support with the weight of my clan without reservation. That was a surprise to Mikoto. The first part, his endorsement and support, was the traditional response. Without reservation meant something categorically different. The Nidame, nor Sandame hadn't even received a without reservation call from his people. Ino was throwing the fate of his clan in with hers, what was left of mine. That thought was bitter, but she walled it up and shoved it back where it belonged. One step at a time. But what shocked her more, and what clearly shocked the rest of the assembly, was 2 more calls of without reservation. Nara. Akimichi. Taruchi almost died on the spot when Hayashi Hyuga, clan head of Konoha's largest clan, called without reservation. Mikoto's mouth curved into a smile. Saving those children from root paid off then. She patted the head of her gray-skinned cyclopean minion who crouched on tiny legs next to her, where she listened to another of her minions who stayed hidden in the room where all the jonin sat in assembly. Mikoto hadn't been invited, but that wouldn't stop her. This was too important to go off plan. 113 for, 0 against, 12 abstaining. Unprecedented support. But she'd listened for 2 hours while they debated because it had to be unanimous. She listened as they blamed her for the Kyubi massacre. They blamed her and her clan for the troubles before that, blamed her for the betrayal, the mass exodus of Uchiha to AIM. Historic in its sheer level of animosity. Her family, husband, her eldest son, her daughter. They left me. Yes, Sasuke was still here. Still hers. She'd get them all back. She would kill Fugaku herself and get her babies back. But she wouldn't sacrifice Konohagakure to do it. No, she had other people for that. More importantly, she lifted a hand from where she sat in a nearby coffee shop in her palm, now covered in fuin glyphs from that night that glowed blue. A massive gray swirling portal opened and she stepped through into the now chaos of the Jonin assembly. I won't let you down, Kushina. I'll protect your son and do you and Minato proud. Jiraiya and Tsunade looked worried while the rest of the room fell silent as she met every eye in the room with a red Sharingan active, swirling with the power of her Mangekyo Sharingan, the eye she'd earned watching her best friend be butchered by someone that was supposed to be dead, and she'd snapped, the eye awakening, producing chaos that she shuddered to remember. No one had seen her full powers yet, but it wasn't raw strength that won her this particular fight, no, though it had helped. This was the favors done. The heirs of all the major clans saved from a fate worse than death that produced this loyalty. She could have used those children as a tool, same as Danzo. But she hadn't, and they knew that. I accept the nomination. Can we adjourn? Taruchi nodded solemnly. She turned and started out the door. We have work to do. Mifune, stay the course until we speak. I pray to Kami we aren't too late. Konohagakure. Village hidden in the leaves. Land of fire. Unknown. The body of Shimura Danzo, covered in implanted Sharingan that had dried out and stared like 1,000 dead spiders' eyes, lay flat and still on the ice-cold metallic slab of an autopsy table in the basement of Konoha Memorial Hospital awaiting the convenience of the head examiner. Sterile equipment, all covered in the same metallic sheen, glimmered in the low, cool light of 100 lamps, strategically placed overhead in static intervals, but each examination room was cordoned off with fuin-reinforced glass. The room was a box filled with boxes, huge, wide and long, created to provide examiners enough space in the event that some bloodline limits were dangerous or had adverse reactions to something in the environment. This is exactly where Danzo had known he'd end up if things went south. He hadn't thought it would have gotten this bad, but as he gasped and sat up, his body feeling beaten like a piece of meat and then run through a grinder, unique opportunities arose when you were backed into a corner. This was a corner. Orochimaru's spies had assured him that Mikoto had no outstanding abilities, despite the fact that something happened to her the night of the Kyubi massacre and the Uchiha defection. That woman proved far more powerful than the snake, or he had ever imagined. He almost hadn't had time to activate his trump card and he'd used almost his entire stock of them fighting his old friend. No matter. Opportunities present themselves. No use crying over spilled milk. Danzo swung his feet over the side of the table, wincing at the pain in his stomach, shoulder, and neck. Ignoring his nakedness, he walked towards the door and came face to face with an orderly in green scrubs who looked just as surprised as Danzo was to see anyone down here. A vacuum spear the width of a coin took the young Irionin in the neck and he choked, coughing, then his eyes glazed in death and Danzo frowned. Unfortunate, but perhaps. A fireball tinged white with heat and a wind jutsu saw ash scattered all over the once sterile examination room. With luck, they'll be confused enough that I should be able to escape without anyone the wiser. When your back is to the wall, seize any advantage you can. Danzo nodded to himself and left. There was only ash left in the room swirling in the breeze he'd created. Chapter 3: The Fuensmith's Apprentice. Chapter 3: The Fuensmith's Apprentice. 2 weeks later. The Three Wolves Mountains. The Land of Iron. Naruto. The wind tore and howled through the lead in the mountain like its namesake. The Three Wolves, a triplet set of frankly unimaginably towering stone pillars that extended above the earth like a clawed hand, only faintly resembled regular mountains. Naruto imagined the wind howling like a warning call that predators were out there sitting steady, watching. Waiting. Icy death waited patiently on the other side of the less sturdy structure. The people of Iron called the divots that were naturally carved into the mountains passes that sheltered travelers les. Naruto stood in one now. The les were common all over Iron Country, as there was no way that travelers could ever even make it to the foot of the mountains without them. Master Auron had originally told him, on his first journey out of the mountains on a delivery to another Fuensmith, that the old samurai had created the les using underground heating vents and excavation techniques, carving a system that ran throughout the length of Iron Country. The air was almost 100 degrees below freezing a short step out of the warmth of the les. Some said the cold was unnatural, but one was mostly safe if you stayed within the proscribed pathways. Nobody questioned why it was so cold, despite the fact it was located a very short distance away from both Kaminari and Fire Country, well known for their warm climes. Inside the safety of Ale, the air was a flat, steady 10 degrees with exhaust vents pouring out of the rock from the underground city sprawling untold distances below his feet. The multi-story furnaces that fueled Iron's most important exportable resource, the mining and smelting of chakra metal ingots, and nor gave their military their keenest advantage while also keeping the air in the les a decent temperature. Well, a temperature that wouldn't immediately kill you, which was just about the same thing. Naruto knew all of this as he was apprenticed to a big meanie of a Fuensmith who just about beat it into him. That and other useless crap he couldn't remotely find a use for. Sometimes, the stuffing of information into Naruto's poor brain by both his grandfather Mifune and Master Auron seemed intended for cruelty only rather than usefulness. The Three Wolves were the largest mountains on the entire continent, stretching up so far that most of the people viewing it from below couldn't even see the tops in the best of conditions. Steep drops in temperature and humidity created clouds that terminated less than halfway up the mountains. The air on the gentle slopes of the Le passages were thin and frigid as Naruto, all of 9 years of age, reveled in the bite of the wind that carried with it the biting coppery taste and smoke scent of metal smithies, his favorite smell aside from that of hand-rolled dumplings that Mother Suzaka made at her market stand. Come to think of it, he'd never seen any kids. Was she even really a mother? He was on his way back from his errand and planned to make a stop at Mother Suzaka's with the wages Auron would give him for delivering the package. The plan was to clean her out of her chicken and pork combo ramen, and maybe the homemade dumplings if time permitted. Naruto's mouth watered in anticipation. First, though, he had to deliver this shipment to his master. Pulling the hood of his thick ice bear cloak closer to his cheeks produced an awkward motion, as he also had the reins to a medium-sized sled that held an incredibly heavy, something on it. Naruto breathed deep in the cold air and set off, with a little difficulty, down the let towards the high-vaulted entrance doors framed by white-covered rock. Naruto didn't ask questions about the packages he picked up, as he'd found that questions indicated curiosity, which just meant that people thought you were bright, which then meant you received more work. Naruto wasn't about that. He liked his simple life, thank you. A lone armored figure manned the door, looking for all the world like a demonic Oni from the Genji stories brought to life. As a child, Naruto remembered when he first saw the samurai in full armor. He'd had nightmares about demons chasing him with huge swords. Cool in the daytime, horrible at night. Mifune had had to stay up very late several nights a week just to comfort him. Yajimbra and Furu still hadn't stopped teasing him, and it had been a full year since. In a world run by the hidden village/daimyo system, absurdly powerful shinobi named Kage ruled supreme, backed by their civilian daimyo, the only check on their power. But there was a reason Iron Country, ruled by their shogun who Naruto thought of as a Kage, continued to live their lives content and safe, protected by the armor, their superior skill in swordplay, and the harsh climbs. Each man or woman in an ONI, despite their lack of usage of chakra in direct combat, was a match for any jonin for speed and strength. Their usage and perfection of swordplay only further widened the gap. Luckily for Iron, no one except the Fuinsmiths could build or maintain the ONI armor systems. Not a single Fuinsmith had ever betrayed the shogunate of Iron. Fuinsmiths created the complicated traditional interfacing Fuin mark on the skin that linked with the armor system, each unique to the person. The armor, usually forged in pure chakra metal, were more works of living art and second skin than tools as families passed down ONI as heirlooms. But the one for guards outside were usually just mass-produced sets. Most of them were equipped with temperature-controlled cooling or heating Fuin, the chakra-powered glyphs that ran almost every system in the city-state of Iron, from the tramway, to the furnaces, to the bathing rooms located on most levels of the city. The samurai of Iron Country, the only country in the entire world that still pledged religiously to the oath of the sage, focused on what they called the Zen arts, and swordplay to the exclusion of all else. Zen arts were a set of skills and techniques that made up what shinobi would call jutsu, or techniques crafted using chakra. The land of Iron was the only country in the entire world that could call itself truly neutral, and that was all thanks to the secrets of the ancient armorers. Samurai were covered in a highly sophisticated armor system nicknamed ONI that used chakra and Fuin jutsu in a top-secret mixture to further enhance everything about the man or woman inside. That, inside his own head, was safe to say, but every country in the world still hadn't figured out how the samurai kept up with the ninja, as armor was never allowed to be lost. They would go to extreme lengths to keep that secret. Samurai, at least ones that kept the oath, disdained and were truly horrified at the perverting of chakra for battle. The oath forbid them from offensive usages of chakra, except in the defense of others or self. Naruto found the whole thing slightly ridiculous. Naruto only knew all of this because he was apprenticed to one of the premier Fuinsmiths in Sekiro's, the city being named for the mountain it was under. Old Auron, Naruto's master, was known across the world for his handcrafted weapons and armor. To this day, even after almost 3 years of working with him, Naruto had no idea what Auron's family name was, as the man was such a workaholic they talked of nothing except the craft. It had been like that most of his life, well, ever since Mifune had found out that he could fluently read Fuin symbologies, unlike anyone, man, woman, or child that they'd ever seen. He could read them as easily as he could kanji, better actually because Naruto sucked butts at letters. Fuin was different. He just knew them. The armor, the ONI system, stood for Organic Neural Interface, and it was made using Fuin inscriptions. Fancy words that meant the Fuin embedded in your skin with the traditional metallic, conductive ink created from liquidizing the chakra metal just conducted the chakra you already had into your suit. You basically became a huge battery that amplified everything you already were. Good swordsmen became great. Bad ones stayed bad, just extra strong and fast. The whole process was awesome, and old Auron was teaching him to do what he did. Naruto loved his city and his people and regretted that he'd given old man Mifune such a hard time about working with Auron. Samurai weren't nearly as revered as shinobi though, which is what Naruto wanted to be more than anything. Mifune always rolled his eyes and muttered about his tendency towards the flashy stuff. But today at least, Naruto was happy enough to be an apprentice Fuinsmith because it got him out of the stuffy confines of the city. He'd spend enough time outside, which meant that old Auron had him retrieving the supplies from another smith named Lake. 9 was about the standard age of apprentices that were allowed to fetch things from Sekiro and Musashi, the other 2 cities in their respective mountains. Besides, Sekiro and Musashi were only about a 2-hour walking journey through the Les. Master Lake worked in Musashi, the western mountain, which was connected as they all were, by the system of warm Les and the tramway underneath. Naruto preferred using the Les as the outside air was, well, it tasted so good after so long spent underground and in and around the furnaces that blasted like dragon fire. Sweat was always pouring off of him and onto his blackened apron as he worked with Aoran in the forge. Naruto nodded at Chosen, the samurai on duty, who appeared, in the suit at least, to be about 7 feet tall, and stepped into a darkened hallway that could fit about 8 horses and carriages across. The walls were dimly lit with flickering shadows. Shadows cast by the Fuin light were thrown 1,000 feet high as Naruto took in the cavern that opened before him like a shy flower as he rounded the corner and proceeded down the massive circular ramps that led down to the bottom level where most of the smithy district resided. To Naruto's left, there was a ramp that led, not down to his destination at Aoran's smithy, but up and to the left, which would take you to the residential district. Mifune was out today doing an inspection in the garrison at Sekiro, the northern mountain, and Naruto would see him when he returned home later that night, but for now, he carefully considered the sled as he eyed the ramp. There were handles on the back to gently guide the burden down the ramp, so Naruto pulled down his hood and switched to the back of the sled, gripping the T-bar handle tightly, anticipating the weight. For this, he mentally flooded his body with chakra, feeling the 365 separate places on his body where chakra flowed from, the tenketsu. Like little gates, or mental switches, chakra flowed easily, steadily. Naruto knew only what everyone else knew, that chakra worked and made him far stronger than he should be for his age. Reinforcing his body with chakra was easy now after sparring with Führer every day, like breathing or blinking or something else unconscious and easy. The energy, power, and strength flooded him, each time like new, like slipping into a suit of ONI armor. Chakra itself was a shot of caffeine, and a tingling feeling of weightlessness all rolled into one feeling. A feeling he could access whenever he wanted to. Naruto was warned against the pleasure of chakra by Mifune constantly. Blah blah blah, intoxicating. Whatever. How could something so intrinsic to who he was ever be bad? He gripped the previously heavy burden and gently guided it down the half-mile-long ramp with ease, a journey that would have seen him arse over tea kettle had he not had access to the strength of chakra. Despite the general prohibition against chakra usage in iron for frivolous tasks, and the obvious one about killing and hurting people with the quote-unquote holy power, reinforcements, or simple bodily enhancements such as he was using, were very common. Among the very small percentage of the population that had enough of it in their chakra networks to readily access, spread through their body alongside their veins, to do more than just breathe and live, that is. He grinned, hurrying. Chakra was amazing. Despite his newfound strength, the burden proved heavier than expected, but he managed. What the hell was even in this shipment anyway? Aoran had been especially secretive, though that was fairly common among new finds. Aoran only worked with the best projects. Once again he mentally thanked Mifune for kicking him in the ass to speak with Aoran. Naruto had met the keen smith very young after he'd stolen a piece of Fuin lying around and read the entire series of Fuin without any training whatsoever. Aoran had laughed until he was sick once he caught Naruto. Mifune wasn't as pleased to find he had a kleptomaniac as a ward. Aoran believed it was fate. Or something. Naruto hadn't been paying attention. The press of the crowd and the ridiculous struggle against the handles of the sled made him forget the sheer curiosity of Aoran's shipment as he made his way into the bustle of Sand's smithy district. Sand City? Sand Mountain? The land of iron. Naruto. There is an awful lot of people out there, for some reason. Pain in my ass, old man. This better be good. Aoran was pleased. He didn't even scold him for his language. Or his grumpy attitude. Scratch that, Master Aoran was very pleased. That much was obvious as Naruto watched from his perch atop a nearby workbench cluttered with tools and miscellaneous pieces of stiff paper with drawn symbols that Naruto instinctively understood without much inspection. Aoran had that look in his eye, a combination gleam of a mythical dragon finding a hoard of treasure, and the bloodthirstiness of the Oni hunkering over a human meal. The whole presentation gave him a slightly manic air, not counting the steel-gray hair sticking up in all angles from where his goggles had pushed it up. Bat-hit crazy he might be, but brilliant nonetheless. This smithy that Aoran ran was one of the 5 types present in the massive city-state of iron. Mifune had explained this to him in painstaking detail as if it were the menu for a gourmet meal. Ignorance, Mifune had said sternly, one finger upraised, was a child's excuse, and you can't afford to be a child, can you? That always confused Naruto. Every time he reminded the old shogun that he was a child, Mifune would grow mysteriously deaf. He'd protest that there was no way the old fart was really that deaf, but it was no use. Furu and Yajimbra would always roll their eyes, laughing. Assholes. Mifune, being the greatest living samurai and the freaking shogun to boot, usually got away with displays like that. Naruto stood baffled when children came up to him, kids own age mind you, and gushed about how cool Mifune was and how they so wanted to be him. Naruto, being thoroughly confused by the goofy, wispy-looking stick of a man and his completely bizarre reputation, would just give the crazies a wide berth. Fangirls and boys followed even the old man. Wild. Rumor had it, and it was true, that Mifune didn't even use an ONI system. Fighting much like the shinobi, he relied strictly on reinforcement jutsu to keep up. Rumor had it that his Iajutsu was so fast the shinobi couldn't even get a hand seal off before losing a hand or a head. The man was nearing his 80th year, but was still all corded muscle covered with thin skin. The man was the freakin' leader of Iron Country, the longest living shogun in recent memory, and he suddenly decided to be deaf? None of what Naruto knew fit the picture of the kindly old grandfather figure who loomed so large in legend and public knowledge. Naruto didn't buy the deaf act and so inevitably would find some way to harass his adopted grandfather. Perhaps this time he'd really spend his whole stipend buying all the rubber ducks he'd threatened Mifune with, and finally fill the bathroom with them as he'd promised. No, too easy to ignore. The man washed under glacial waterfalls outside for Shinigami's sake on the regular. Perhaps scorpion pepper flakes in his underpants? The man would never fall for that, would he? Naruto considered this. Mifune was really freakin' old though, and kinda forgetful. Aoran was frowning at whatever it was on the table. You didn't drop this, did you, boy? Naruto's attention, wandering as it frequently did, snapped back to the enormous mustachioed face of old Aoran, who held up a piece of silvery doohickey not at all like the dark silver-veined chakra metal they usually worked with. The piece, oblong in shape and resembling a submersible with arms, was a brighter metallic color. Naruto usually could identify the different alloys and amalgams they typically were handed by the chakrasmiths, but this was something else entirely. Naruto frowned, finger at the side of his face. Then he registered the question and his brain caught up, arms beginning to windmill in denial. Drop one expensive item and your name was marked for eternity around here. That was one time. I don't care, boy, I just want to know. It's important. Naruto swallowed, sweating despite the forge not being on. No, I swear. Aoran nodded, graying mustache as thick as Naruto's forearm quivering. What the hell is that thing made out of anyway? Naruto asked, curious, despite himself. Aoran stood up from the long rectangular workbench. The table was unique with clamps to hold pieces of armor locked in place for etching and pouring of the Fuin lines. Delicate, the glyphs were a language of sorts, part living chakra, part calligraphy, part computer. Naruto didn't know much about what exactly it came from as no one spoke the language, but Fuinjutsu, the art of inscribing and activating the hundreds of thousands of symbols, was a truly lost art. No one today could really create new ones. Far, far too dangerous. Aoran went on and on with his warnings, citing the lost city of Hrathiuki, in the land of snow. Apparently they'd attempted to create a new Fuinjutsu, and one wrong symbol turned a machine dedicated to creating water from ambient water vapor, and instead blew the entire city up in a scorching fireball that could be seen from the peaks of Kaminari. Fuinjutsu was dangerous, but not to Naruto. He just knew if something was wrong and when it was right. Most of the hundreds of thousands of established functional Fuinjutsu were said to have been lost in the Warring States period. Most called it a dark age, from what little history Taza and Yajimbra managed to cram in his head. They'd lost countless amounts of technology used for all sorts of purposes they could only now dream of. The oaths of the sage, that said that chakra was only to be used to bring peace and connect to one another, had been thoroughly shattered into tiny pieces during the Warring States period, similar to the empire that had preceded it. Their current daimyo system, A piece of civilization revived by Hashirama Senju was what was left of that, similar to how the Onai system was the only thing left of the Empire's warriors. Iron Country smiths had found only one of those armor sets deep in a cavern of Sekiro hundreds of years ago. That was the day the samurai were born. According to Auron, only the Uzumaki clan, of which there were no remaining members, had retained any of the skill with Fuin Jutsu that created the technology they used in the past, and they were wiped out wholesale on the Day of Sorrow, 30+ years ago. Their special skills were such that no one could even get a straight answer about what exactly it was, save that they were so deadly that many of the shinobi hidden villages, here Naruto snorted thinking about how hidden they really were, banded together to get rid of them. Konohagaku being their only ally availed them as much as you'd think. Not at all. Konoha had been too late. So now the world was left with a handful of imitation copy artists like Naruto and old Auron who were just really good at playing around with what they already had. Experimentation was strictly forbidden, except under strict safety provisions. Then Naruto got a good look at what Auron had in front of him and froze. This was something straight up covered with new Fuin. Dangerous Fuin. Naruto knew instantly, as he always did, what the Fuin were intended for, but Naruto also knew these were not traditional symbols. These were old. There was no way that Auron could know what they did, so how did Naruto? The question bothered him as it always did, and he dismissed it as he always did. Any serious questions about his past, his ability to read Fuin, or why he grew up in Iron and not Konoha, was always met with an impenetrable wall of silence and changing subjects. Auron had always seemed on the verging of telling him something, maybe something important, but he got a funny look on his face and always changed the subject. The fairly compact object that Naruto had hitched on his janky sled was built like a sarcophagus. A silvery coffin-looking thing perhaps 5.5 feet long etched entirely out of that silvery metal and covered in Fuin. Naruto stared at them, ignoring the fact that Auron was watching Naruto's reaction, not the symbol-covered thing. Naruto's violet eyes tracked the symbols, reading them like an open book. At first they came slow, then they came all at once in triplets. Throne world. Power. Transfer. Conduit. Resurrection. Restriction. Deviation. Death. Life. Obfuscate. Cessation. Nadir. Capture. Frozen. Ascendant. The symbols went on and on, flashing in his head. Symbolical duologies that made perfect sense, opened the world like a patchwork of threads he could push and pull to go where and when he wanted, do whatever he wanted. Power like he never could have imagined. A frozen world, an expression of a soul that exploded like a star. Power surging in swirling fractals and a horned woman at the center staring at him, the real him. A snarling chorus blending to one sounded deep within him, something he'd never heard before. The woman inside smirked. Naruto got the impression she was absolutely insane and impossibly knew exactly what he was, the real him. Well? Naruto blinked, backing out of that weird trance. And what was that place? He refocused, forgetting immediately what just happened, doing as Auron had asked. Some came up blank as Naruto read them, like he was reading a book, understood the letters and words, but realized there was deeper meaning that was being glossed over. What he did understand, even at 9 years of age, was that this was a prison? A prison. Yes. I knew you'd get it eventually. Auron gestured with a thick hand. Naruto hadn't realized he'd spoken out loud. Lake knew this was beyond his scope and so gave it to me. I knew enough of those symbols at first glance, though not all of them, to know what I was looking at. He smiled, gold teeth showing. The look was warm, proud. I wanted to see if you could puzzle them out with your curious natural intuition. Those words were loaded, but Naruto didn't know with what. He clapped a hand on Naruto's shoulder, moved enough over that he could reach. Now I know for sure, and we can begin moving you into the real apprentice stage, I should think. This is big, Naruto. I was 15 when I sat for the tests. Wait till I tell Mifune. He'll pay up for sure. Naruto spluttered, gaping like an idiot. Shimizu, his best friend besides his fellow apprentice Rorin, would have laughed herself sick at his expression. Apprentice? Him? This early? He was 9. Wait, you were betting on me? Auron went mysteriously deaf and started tinkering with a device that consisted of a large number of gears, nozzles, and gauges. Naruto had been studiously avoiding talk of taking the tests for ages as he didn't want the responsibility. Shimizu called him lazy, but he liked to think that he enjoyed the simple life of etching fuin glyphs and testing the armor, despite his inability to fit into them properly, more than doing the actual work of fabrication. The long-haired blonde enjoyed his simple wages, enjoyed the long hours working the etching tool and listening to the soothing buzz of his etcher as he worked. Did he even want to give up his life of menial, soothing, relaxing work for real, and a real apprenticeship to boot? Auron was the best fuinsmith around, but that would mean giving up his dream to become a shinobi. Fuinsmithing took almost 10 years of study to properly master, at least to Auron's standards. Apprenticeship left little time for chakra and the study of its applications in battle. Not to mention he'd been dreaming of traveling to Fire to study where Mifune told him his parents had grown up. Shimizu, Taza, and Furu had gotten tired of hearing him, he was sure, ranting and raving about how awesome and badass the first and fourth Hokage had been. Naruto's thoughts raced around, seeking answers, finding none, grasping for straws. His eyes fell on the silver-inlaid prison. Something told him to run away from it, and never come back, to drop it in the deepest part of the Nanzen Ocean. Auron would never do that. Preservation of Fuin history was a big deal to him. Thoughts racing, Naruto figured that a prison was meant to hold something. Duh. Nice detective work. This, he knew, was a diversion so he wouldn't have to think about the tough decisions ahead of him, but right now it was a welcome relief. A puzzle to solve. So, prison/container question was, what the hell was it holding? The glyph for power, carved like two people holding hands, usually indicated a certain level of chakra enforcement in restraint. This was different though, like a feedback loop that strengthened the initial investiture. That was worth exploring, but the reality glyph? That, depending on the expression required by the other sequences, that meant holding something outside of what we knew as the here and now. Was it a bijou? Auron had shown him some great works of Fuin, and bijou was typically where the true innovation in containment happened, largely to horrible effect. Kumo used the iron armor seal to do their containment. Konohagakure's was a mystery, as was the other places. Most of the bijou seals used a reality glyph somewhere to different effect. What could this be, if not a bijou? A mythical apex knight from the wild and dangerous western continents? A demon from the land of demons far to the east? Awesome powers with a capital P that would take Naruto to the top of the world's deadliest warriors? An alien from the moon or the stars above? Auron smacked Naruto on the side of the head, jolting him out of his super cool daydreams. What the fuck, Auron? Smack, heavier this time. Oh. God damn it. Don't curse, you little shit, or I'll box your ears till you hear me in your sleep. Mifune will hang both of us for improper behavior. You're 9 and not an apprentice just yet, nor are you a goddamn sailor. Where have you learned all this frickin' language, huh? He wouldn't really tell Mifune, as that would mean having to admit he messed up in his tutelage. Naruto rubbed his head. Fine. But you really think I'm ready? I mean, Rorin isn't even testing for a true apprenticeship, and he can forge and inscribe a whole set of armor himself. Rorin was another one of Naruto's good friends. Him, Shimizu, and Rorin were the only one of their age group that had actual responsibilities in the city. Most of the other kids were part of the school crews or agri-farming smiths that worked in the Tunnel Gardens. Auron was already waving away Naruto's concern. We'll start that later today, okay? Rorin is a genius with metalwork, no doubt about it, but don't discount yourself. You've a deft hand, boy, deft indeed. The important point, and forget the metalwork for a second, is the glyphs themselves. Mess those up and boom. Naruto rolled his eyes, mouthing the words that Auron was about to speak. Never forget the terrible tragedy of Hrotheuki. Boom! Luckily, Auron didn't see him, continuing without stopping. Forging the metal is the easy part. It's the precision with the glyphs and the passion you pour into your projects The man waved at the objects hanging on various points in the room, elaborate works of metallic art, not to mention the control with which you wield your chakra in the proper investiture of the Fuin. You know this. You have more goddamn chakra than any man, woman, child, in 100,000 miles, and despite that, you're still learning to control it, but you can spin and write the ONI matrices better than people twice your age. Auron looked at him, gruff face softening. I swear you're a tiny bijou with that inexhaustible mouth of yours. He, sticking a finger up and shouting. I would stake my reputation on you passing first try. Just as I'll state you'll pass me sooner rather than later if I have my way. Naruto just stared at his feet awkwardly. Auron seemed to sense it as he let out a large, bellowing sigh that for another man would sound ridiculous, but on Auron it was normal. Uncertainty wasn't something Naruto was used to, nor such high praise. He was comfortable here doing almost nothing, damn it. Fuinjutsu let him do his thing, alone save for the steady presence of Auron. No one asked him to fight, to draw a blade he wielded clumsily at best. Aiijutsu was difficult, and not really him. Aiijutsu required patience that Naruto couldn't summon save for when faced with an arduous glyphing task. But this opportunity was big. Equally as terrifying as facing an opponent in the ring and being asked to fight to submission. His opponents never submitted. Something about being the shogun's grandson made opponents want to humiliate him with their blade work. Blade work was the religion of Iron Country, and while Naruto was better than average with a weapon in his hand, the specific style that samurai used was beyond him for reasons he couldn't tell you even if someone held a blade to his throat. Aijutsu was the traditional style of samurai and he was absolute pants at it. Mifune knew, Taza knew, Furin knew, but they kept pushing him. But this is the bedrock of the Zen arts, Naruto. If you want to be a samurai, you have to master this. He hated it. He didn't even want to be a samurai. This was big, this apprenticeship decision. Too big. Mifune had spent the last 3 weeks attempting to talk to Naruto about his future. The smithy was a place of creation that was the other half of the Zen arts that Mifune and Taza droned on about. Mifune talked of big things like death and honor and oaths kept and what it meant to be a good person. What that had to do with samurai and battle he had no idea. The shogun had talked of why samurai were so different from shinobi. That it was the oath of the sage that kept them from employing chakra directly in attack. They kept to the oath and the shinobi had not. That chakra could not be used in profane ways like the shinobi did. To kill. To maim. The blade was pure, patience, skill, and precision turned in concert to defend the oath. That frustrated Naruto. As an orphan, he made up stories about his parents after Mifune told him they were ninja from Konohagakure. Wild fantasies about saving princesses and becoming Hokage leaped through his head and made him itch to leave and travel the distance to the place he knew he belonged, the place his parents were from, Konohagakure. The village hidden in the leaves. Konoha, as it was known by most, was the epicenter of the greatest ninja village on the continent, and the target of a now brewing war that all the adults spoke of and sounded more than worried. Most of the other 4 didn't want to admit it, but the most powerful ninja of the last 100 years all came straight from his home in the Land of Fire. So, it was important to Naruto that he eventually travel there and become a ninja. Mifune told him that this year was the testing year, and they'd sit down to really discuss what Naruto wanted when garrison inspections were over. To travel far away to the Land of Fire and become a shinobi, using chakra in battle in defiance of the oath of the sage, or become a samurai here under Mifune's command? Mifune always reminded him that he had trouble fighting here, among friends. What made him so certain he could do it with chakra and to strangers? To kill innocents like shinobi did? That pissed him off. The idea that shinobi were just mindless killers was stupid and Naruto knew they were just trying to put him off the idea. Mifune was snooty, that was all right? Master Auron seemed to be suggesting something else, a third option, an alternative path, that of an early and therefore promising start as a Fuinsmith. The idea had a certain excitement to it. The Fuinsmiths were all extremely well respected as they were literally the reason that the Land of Iron still stood centuries upon centuries. The power of the suits they forged for their warriors was incalculable. Armor that could shrug off most normal jutsu. Unthinkable to the average civilian in the other countries. He'd have the chance to become one of the greats under Master Auron. Vital. Useful. Respected and not scoffed at for his absolutely atrocious skill with Iajutsu. But his parents were shinobi. They'd want him to follow in their footsteps, right? To fight for their Hokage? Naruto? Lad? Snap. Snap. Auron was snapping his thick fingers in front of his nose. His master's face was soft in the pale fire of the forge light. It wasn't stoked and therefore gave off a weak kind of heat, though still relatively strong compared to the cavern. But Naruto didn't even notice. The thoughts were all swirling in his head and he didn't want to say the wrong thing, despite knowing that Auron would accept whatever he said and support him. So too would Mifune. They were great about that, but Naruto still felt paralyzed, like he'd disappoint the only people who mattered to him no matter what he did. Dead and living people. He was only 9 and this was big in his head, and it made his chest hurt thinking about it. Yes, sorry, master. I was just thinking, well, Mifune said we'd talk later. After the inspections. Do I have to decide now? Auron waved away Naruto's concern. Of course not. You know that, lad. I'll accept whatever you both decide. By unspoken agreement, Naruto and Auron turned to look at the silvery curiosity on his work desk. There was exciting work ahead of them, figuring something this strange, exotic, and new out. Naruto smiled a feral smile. I'll get the tongs and the censer? Auron laughed. That eager, eh? Naruto scoffed. There is nothing more fun than finding new Fuin, nothing. You sure you aren't getting too old for this, master? You old fart you? Auron growled, but waved him away. Just get the tools and we'll get started, provided there is no more out of ya, you hear me, lad? All Auron heard was laughter as the two became busy. They had new Fuinjutsu symbols to decode and parse out. Perhaps they'd discover a new function they could add to the armor systems? That would be huge. Naruto, grateful to have something to focus on and help calm his racing thoughts, sprinted into the back room searching for the sensor. The device was a simple measuring tool used to create exacting specifications for duplication of the glyphs. Each Fuinsmith had their own sensor, calibrated to their specifics. Naruto didn't want to use Auron's, the device he'd been fiddling with, but wanted his own that he kept in the workspace in the back room. A horn sounded loud enough to cut through the chugging, bellowing repetitive sound from the forge, once, twice. Iron relied on a countrywide emergency alert system in case of an attack. Sometimes it was used to announce important events in each city, thus most people came to understand which signals meant what. That was the official state visitation signal, that outsiders were arriving. A gathering would be underway in the square. Mifune wasn't due for another 4 hours as he was doing inspections on the far garrisons for the other 2 mountain cities. Why was he back so quickly? Naruto sprinted out and saw an equally puzzled gaze matching him from Auron. Together, the two of them tore off their aprons and goggles and exited the 2-story smithy out onto the main thoroughfare of Sekiro proper. New Fuin was exciting, but very rarely were there ever visitations from other heads of state, the last being a 5 Kage summit during the Third World War, or so he remembered Fuhrer telling him during a boring-ass history lecture. The mountain was enormous, but this particular level of the city was only about 500 feet from rocky floor to rocky ceiling carved into a giant gently sloped bowl. One enormous ramp circled the bowl and led up to the gatehouse that Naruto initially passed through with his mysterious burden. Sand proper was only a part of Sand City, tucked haphazardly like discarded toys into the bottom of the bowl. A huge procession trampled down the ramp, hornblower in the middle flanked by huge samurai in full armor looking like terrible demons from the underworld, abyssal yomi. Mifune was at the head, his normally untidy gray beard trimmed for once and looking somehow extra small, dwarfed in his simple segment at a plate by every man and woman around him, his honor guard, that towered above him by at least 2 or 3 feet. But it was the tall man next to him, much shorter than the 7-foot armored figures all around, but somehow standing out and above all of them by sheer presence. Naruto didn't know if that was chakra pressure he was feeling or simple gravitas. He didn't know which would be worse. The man wore a red short robe, tied loosely in the front, with a disturbingly faceless no mask, all red like blood, framed by massive tousled waves of obsidian black hair curled in ringlets that tumbled down his back, terminating at his waist. An oversized gun by, an army arrangement fan usually used to signal distant forces in a regular non-shinobi army, was strapped by chains to the man's back. Black boots, black belt, and dark gloves covered him and left no hint of skin. Naruto knew this person by fearful name only, the Seifuku-sha, the butcher of the bloody mist, the man in red, the conqueror as people fearfully whispered. He'd declared a one-man war against Mizugakure, daimyo and kage, and won. Now he declared that Kumo was next if they didn't stop antagonizing his forces along the Mizu border. Everyone who had half a brain and listened to any part of the news certainly knew of him, given the horrors happening right now in the land of mist. Maybe a dozen people turned up half dead at the gates of iron asking for asylum each day. Musashi City to the west was almost filled to the brim. That same story was repeated in all the northern countries and some of the southern ones as well. Naruto suspected this was why people were here. Was this another 5 Kage summit? Some said there were over 400,000 dead and dying, others only 50,000 or more. Regardless, newscasters were starting to call it the Bloody Mist instead of Mizukagure. The Big Five, or now 4 as nobody knew what had happened to the Mist government, Kage or daimyo aside from rumors of their deaths, had recently called for a shinobi summit to address the humanitarian crisis starting at the borders of Kaminari and Hino Kuni. That summit would no doubt happen right here in Iron Country, as the only powerful neutral third party. Iron had been that neutral party in all shinobi wars and disputes in the last 150 years. Naruto knew all that, and yet, there was something ominous and foreboding in those deep black eyes staring out of the blood-red-robed figure. This felt like inviting the wolf to hang out with the sheep for a social call. Those eyes flashed, just for a second, a deep disturbing yellow, like a lantern on a boat in a dark sea. Naruto shivered. Next to the red-clad figure, Mifune locked eyes with Naruto, not bothering to hide that he knew exactly where his ward was, and in those tired eyes there was a hint of something Naruto couldn't understand. A satisfied recognition, perhaps. Mifune, shogun of Iron Country, had invited the Butcher of the Bloody Mist and all the shadows of the shinobi world to Sand City. What was he thinking? Behind the first group came the Reikage of Kumogakure with his retinue of gray-clad sword-wielding shinobi, followed by the coterie of deep nut-brown-colored shinobi flanking the Tsuchikage of Hidden Rock, Anoki the fence-sitter. Nobody called him that to his face. All of the Big Five, minus Mizu as they were in the midst of being conquered by the man Mifune had invited, had come with the standard retinue of 10 shinobi. Naruto pushed through the press of the crowd to get closer to the front to better see the delegations. There, he spotted the next and last few to arrive. Naruto's heart was beating fast in his chest as he waited for the one he most wanted to see. His home. His people. The village to which his mother and father had pledged their lives and most likely died to protect. Naruto had no idea such a big event was happening today. This might have been the most exciting event of his admittedly very young life. Why hadn't Mifune told him? Naruto didn't know how to feel about that. Did Mifune not trust him? Suna arrived next, the Wind Country Kage surrounded by tan-colored shinobi, some with large battle fans strapped to their backs. Again, standard. Their Kage was anything but standard, however. Pakura of the Scorch Release was a famous war hero and a staunch ally of Konohagakure. The story around her had grown up like weeds since the Wind Civil War. Here she was, in all her heroic glory. Tall, lithe, the woman had bicolored hair, black and blonde, with eyes that seemed to glow like the aftermath of an explosion. She was amazingly cool. There was a strange red-haired boy next to her, masked completely unlike the rest. He couldn't have been any older than Naruto. Strange. He had a large gourd on his back the color of the desert. Wow, a boy that young as a guardian of the Kazekage? Naruto grinned. Shinobi were awesome. Pakura wasn't what he was most anxious to see though. Eyes straining, Naruto anxiously scanned the entrance and moved again, pushing past people in a way that would have earned him a scolding from Mifune if he'd seen. Where were they? Where was Konoha? Surely, they wouldn't have skipped something as momentous and world-changing as a 5 Kage summit, not with their ally Suna here in force. Would they? But no, Naruto moved and stopped on a broken crate next to a tavern that had a nice angle to look up at the descending ramped entranceway, and it was there that he saw them. Naruto wasn't disappointed, just confused. 3 people entered in total. 1 woman walked well ahead of the other 2 white-masked shinobi. They were so strange it made Naruto's heart beat even faster. The first, to the left of the woman in the center, was completely covered in a bizarre spider's web of pale bandages and had an unsettling white mask, the kind that Anbu wore, but unpainted by animal images. Long, dark hair fell down her back in a waterfall of ringlets, similar to the butcher of the Bloody Mist. Her mask had a glyph painted on her forehead that Naruto didn't understand. What is the foolish fire? They were passing too quickly to linger long on its meaning. The man to the right wore the standard Konoha uniform. He'd seen them in the bingo books. Green flak jacket with many pockets covering a standard dark blue one-piece jumpsuit of some heavy material. He also had a white mask, but this one had a marking in the center that simply read Blade. Above his left hip, poked a hand-and-a-half hilt, longer than a standard blade. Then Naruto noticed that above his right shoulder sat 5 more sets of blade hilts. Naruto was so confused. None of them were remotely standard hilts for shinobi blades. Naruto himself had watched Master Auron forge blades like these. The man wore a samurai's full-length odachi and carried 5 more above his shoulder in a very unwieldy fashion. The whole getup must have weighed a ton. What the hell was the point? You couldn't wield 5 blades at a time, could you? Sure enough, as Naruto looked, they rounded part of the spiral and he could see the bottom of the blades and the scabbard was poking out. 5 feet if he had to judge. A warrior's blade. Many, many blades, he amended. The woman in the middle made the 2 of them an afterthought, and the mystery of the bizarre blades disappeared from his mind. The stories of the newest shadow of Konohagakure, the Godame Hokage, did not do her justice. Naruto had once been exploring Sekiro and run across one of the deep delve caverns that were simply black holes in the rocky ground. The shadows in them were so deep, so impenetrable, that it felt like the light from his portable lantern did nothing more than show how futile it was trying to push back the vast dark. She looked like a woman made from those same shadows. Midnight hair and fathomless black eyes contrasted her pale skin sharply, making her seem all the darker for it. The Hokage seemed to float above the ground, though he was sure it was just a trick of the light, and glided forward covered in the traditional white and red silk cloak of office. The other Kages had similar versions that showed off the colors and elemental namesakes of their villages. Hers was no different except that it shrouded her whole body from the neck down. The equally light-colored hat, that of a rice farmer except made from no doubt expensive materials, displayed the glyph for fire shadow proudly. Naruto thought he saw a brief flash of a red eye peeking out from between the folds of her cloak, and then it was gone. He kept looking but saw nothing and no movement from the cloak aside from the gentle swaying as she finally descended the whole ramp. 3 Wolf Square, the largest such plaza in the entirety of Iron Country, could house 150,000 people easily, but it felt cramped as the various figures arrayed themselves in a 5-pointed star formation. The Kage, and the man they clearly came to talk with, stood waiting for the Hokage to arrive. Arrayed as they were in force, the stares were clearly hostile and Naruto shifted and jumped off the crate, running back to the edge of the crowd to see the Hokage. Scooting through the legs of the majority of the folks were annoying, but there were a few kids in the crowd hustling like Naruto. Hostile energy filled the almost empty plaza as the edges of the crowd were hundreds of feet back. The Hokage arrived just as Naruto did, and it was Eye of Kumogakure, the Raikage, who broke the tense silence previously broken only by the click of her heels on the cobbled stone. His voice carried easily. I wasn't sure if you could afford to leave Konoha, Lady Hokage. The village hidden in lightning is so glad you could join us. I'm sure things are hectic for you right now. His grin, teeth shining in a darkly tanned face, stood out like white at a funeral. The Hokage said nothing. What was the Raikage talking about? What was hectic? 2 shinobi as guards? I fear for your safety on the way home, Lady Hokage. Konoha needs her Hokage in these troubling times. The Hokage could have given a statue pointers. None of her 2 guards so much as shifted. A samurai could have cut the silence with a sword. Mifune, the shortest one among those gathered, sliced through the awkwardness and the group of shinobi like the prow of a breaker ship moving through the floes of ice, stepping into the center. He bowed to the Hokage in the traditional way, hands twisted to the right side and bowing in half at the waist. "Welcome, Lady Mikoto, Lord A." He nodded to each in turn. "Banter is for idle times, and these are anything but. Come. We have work to be about, and people die while we chatter." Mifune unbowed and seemed at that moment to be truly the shogun that all Kage respected, despite his age and pacifism. He gestured strongly. And Lady Mikoto followed, hesitation barely noticeable from either. Mifune didn't stop, but he did turn and his eyes darted to find Naruto's, not sweeping, but honing in quickly. They seemed to drink in the light and reflect the fire of the torches blazing around them. The words Mifune then spoke echoed throughout the square. "We've much to discuss." The old man shifted his head and it seemed to tell him to get the hell home. The gathered Kage ignored the byplay and followed Mifune and his lieutenants into the administrative building bordering the square, colonnades and work stone proving opulent enough a housing center for the situation. Naruto slunk back into the press of the crowd, trying not to jostle anyone. He'd seen what he wanted to see anyway. But there was a commotion in the back of the crowd, shouting and pushing, that was growing in strength. The commotion pressed near and Naruto, only 9 and small for his age, didn't have a chance to react as he was shoved, violently, tossed into the edge of the now empty square as the commotion burst through the center of the mass of people like some strange, great beast had stampeded and thrown folks aside. Naruto scrambled up, having landed properly into a tucked roll as he'd been taught, turned to run and went the wrong way, straight into the square. Screaming had started behind him and all around him was chaos as people started running, not knowing which way to go as senseless panic infected the crowd. What the hell was going on? The sheer noise almost deafened him and he clapped his hands over his ears and staggered away. But all that meant was that he smacked his head when he was hit from behind by something he couldn't see, couldn't hear, unable to brace his fall. The impact jarred him, his knee hitting the ground, then another push came, shoving him prone. A figure was standing above him, straddling him. He could feel it. Naruto had expected to be trampled by the enraged crowd surging in his direction, but air and debris pushed around him from above. Naruto curled tight. A thunderclap of noise halted the crowd. A voice roaring with strength amplified above that of a hammer blow on a steel anvil, or the crack of a glacier breaking away from a cliff face. Silence. Mifune stood, sword out and horizontal to his body, framed by a semicircle of the delegates who hadn't moved. Blood dripped from the blade Mifune had used. Naruto peeked his head up and found that one man, a bear of a human being, covered in what looked like bricks of some dark color, sporting wires, was kneeling like a puppet with cut strings about to fall, facing the collective Kage with a hand still clutching something in his hands, and missing a head. One of the delegates wasn't present. The perfect face of the Hokage stared down at him from under the shadows of her hat. She was smiling. One finger was held against her lips. Naruto shook his head. But what had happened? Why had she saved him? Naruto stared at the headless man. Blood leaked from a graphic cross-section of the inside of his neck, white bone clearly visible as the man pitched forward, spurting arterial blood. Naruto wiped his forehead, sweat mingling with blood as he stared at his fingers. Red like the eyes of the Hokage. Red like the giblets of blood stringy and hanging off the dead man's neck. Red like the eye of the creature that stared out from beneath the Hokage's legs, hiding with tiny arms clutching her armored leg. But the creature was hideous. Naruto's eyes slid away, distracted by the sudden influx of movement and screaming. Behind it, Naruto's eyes focused on Mifune, whose eyes widened as the headless man released his grip on something in his hand. Mifune was right at the center. Naruto caught sight of Yojimba, Mifune's protege and bodyguard both, a man like an uncle to Naruto, dark eyes frantic, tackling his shogun. Dead man switch. Down. Everything exploded? A swirling, guttural sound echoed through the screaming. The mountain shook, but it sounded like it was from outside, above them? Sound was muted, deafening. Then stopped. He dropped to the ground again and was face to face with the strange cyclops creature that was only a few inches high, crouched by the Hokage's boot. Naruto continued to stare at the thing. A part of him, the part trained by Mifune, identified shock in himself, but another part didn't care that something had exploded and then ceased before any wind could reach him. A high-yield explosive, but no consequences. The thing. Hideous. And tiny. And bone-white. The thing spoke to him from a mouth that stretched across its face, dominating the body slightly less than what sat in the center. It was a shin-high creature of what looked like the stuff bee cocoons were made of, a kind of birch-white wood, but it wasn't wood, because it had an enormous eye. The thing seemed concerned, crouching down to tap him on the tip of his nose. Naruto went cross-eyed trying to look at the tiny three-fingered gray hand booping him. Wood couldn't talk, didn't have eyes, or blink. Could it? Naruto's thoughts were scattered like dandelion fluff on the wind. Focus! The eye was like nothing else he'd ever seen. An enormous singular eye stood out prominently on a face, if you could call it that was warped and twisted. Like from a bad sculptor working off a misshapen human figure. Blood red and black, the pupil contained a throwing star-shaped black symbol. If the throwing star was 3 teardrop shapes connected by rotating lines. The whites of the eye were thoroughly bloodshot. Naruto was sure his mouth was hanging open, staring at it. While he stared, the thing's tail twitched, tiny legs swishing as it moved towards him. Where had it come from? He couldn't process this. Had he been hit harder than he thought? Was he dead? Delirious from blood loss? The explosion. What had Yojimba called it? A dead man's switch? Naruto scrambled up and tried not to hit the Hokage who still stood near him, and then the creature was gone, swirling away into a shattered fractal swath, like mixing paint with the colors of the scene behind the nothingness in the air. Gone. Naruto looked up and the same thing was happening to the man's body. There was no body. Wait. Where had it gone? The same gray swirl, a warping of the air and image behind the hole, swallowed itself and was gone. The body was gone with it. Had she done something? Her eyes were red and black and shaped strangely, like an upside-down cross that spun lazily and then it stopped. The eye changed. They were black. Normal. She was still smiling at him. Naruto wouldn't have called it a nice smile, more, well, she looked like an ice bear that found an injured seal. Naruto was suddenly afraid that he was the seal. Are you unharmed, Naruto Uzumaki? The Hokage knew his name, the one Mifune tried to hide by giving him an orphan's name in Iron Country. Naruto no Tetsu, officially, a family name that tied him to the country like all the other orphans. But she knew the real one. It was the name he'd lost. The one he'd promised never to tell anyone. Sand City? Sand Mountain. The Land of Iron. Naruto. Chaos still reigned with men, women, children, those who'd come out to see the once-in-a-lifetime gathering of leaders from all the hidden villages, running in terror. The body of the man who had been screaming and running at the delegation was nowhere to be seen. No explosion, but a lot of blood. Slowly, people relaxed as they found that seemingly nothing had happened. That gray swirl in the air, that mixing of paint using the colors of the things around it, had sucked the man into nothing. There was no trace that anything untoward had ever happened, minus a gallon of blood spilled on the ground in a huge swath. Naruto was still stuck on that creature with one eye and the Hokage with her eyes of blood. That and the fact that she knew him, the real him, the one he'd promised never to tell anybody. That was one of the very first things Naruto could remember Mifune speaking to him about. The secret. The big secret. People wouldn't just kill him, they'd take him away and do, well, Mifune never quite said, but Naruto's imagination at 5 was wild and got more vivid each year thereafter. Those people wanted him for his ability to not just read Fuin, but understand it on a level not even Auron could grasp and, well, it didn't seem so fabulous to Naruto, but Mifune told him the Uzumaki were wholesale slaughtered for their ability to read, understand, and craft new Fuinjutsu without a single accident that prevented others from experimentation. An Uzumaki just knew if something would work or not. Legends told they could bind gods to their symbologies. Even Hashirama Senju, founder of Kanehigakure, could only restrain Bijou, not seal them. He needed an Uzumaki to do that, the impossible. Even the rumor of that idea had gotten his whole clan wiped out in a day. Mifune had told him stories of the Day of Sorrow. So, for the Hokage to know his full name. His parents had been shinobi of the Leaf Village, one in Yuzushiogakure refugee, according to Mifune, but that didn't mean that it was okay that the Hokage knew. Panic rose inside his chest, a crushing feel like a fist squeezing his throat, heart racing, palms sweaty. Naruto tried to breathe nice and even, but it didn't work. Dizziness swept over him. Not even Aoran knew the truth. If he had, well, nothing bad would have happened, but Mifune had made him swear not to tell a soul. And Naruto never went back on a promise. It took him a minute or two to get himself under control with a breathing trick learned from Taza. His palms were sweaty as well, so he wiped them on his trousers and stood, staggering back away from her. How? That is quite enough, Lady Hokage. Mifune was there. Shorter than the Hokage, but somehow taking up all the available space in the market square, he presented a comforting bulwark against everything that was happening. This day was strange, horrible, and had gotten stranger still. The apprenticeship decision, the glyph-covered prison, the Seifuku-sha staring at him like he knew him, the Hokage knowing his name? Had he mentioned the looming specter of the journeyman trials and him, still so young? It was all too much. Gramps. It's all right, Naruto. I'm sure today has been long. Please head back to Master Aoran's, and I'll have Yojimba collect you for dinner. I'm afraid I'll be a little late tonight. Aye. Mifune turned slightly, Naruto not missing how he kept the Hokage in his field of vision. Mifune's face was smooth, weather-worn and dimpled. He always gave the impression he was thinking of a great joke, and it was reflected in the lines on his face. The Shogun's face always made Naruto feel like everything was going to be okay. Like Mifune was an immortal guardian made of stone that occasionally smiled, but only for him. None of that confidence was there when he searched for it, but the smile, that was the same. Naruto steadied and listened as Mifune spoke quietly. There is a lot going on today, Naruto. Some things, well, I prepared you as best I could, and there is still more I need to say. Things that I left too long, perhaps. But for now, I need you to go and say nothing to anyone. Naruto nodded reluctantly, turning to go as Mifune stood, but Mifune didn't let go of his arm. The last Uzumaki looked up, confused. Mifune's hand tightened. The Hokage and him were in something of a staring contest. Naruto could feel the tension in his grandfather's arm. Mifune was his grandfather, no matter what anyone said. Naruto, iron is strong, yes. Inflexible? Yes. Is that a good thing? Naruto frowned, thrown for a second. Why was he asking that? Every good blacksmith knew that iron was a brittle metal and needed alloying to make useful, despite its relative strength compared to wood. No, the properties of iron makes it inflexible and prone to shattering. A flexible metal alloy is always stronger than pure stock. Why? Naruto frowned, but Mifune smiled. Yes, I've always said that hardness doesn't indicate strength. Flexibility and willingness to bend to outside forces are best. I'm glad you agree. Perhaps the samurai could have benefited from some alloying of our own. What the hell kind of a question is that, old man? Stop being weird and cryptic, for once. Mifune laughed loudly at that, and Naruto thought he was imagining his earlier worries. Things would be okay. They just had to get through this 5 Kage summit. Mifune ruffled his head and pushed him slightly in the direction of Aoran's smithy. The look on his face, it reminded Naruto of the nightmares he'd wake screaming from when he was younger. Dreams of fire, blood, a demon he couldn't see, of terrifying power, devouring him whole. Mifune would sit with him and rub his back in quiet circles, this same look he had now in his eyes. Sadness and some knowledge he hadn't felt like sharing just yet. Naruto's stomach clenched involuntarily, but he made himself walk away. He tried not to look back as he was walking away, but Naruto couldn't help looking back at his grandfather, a grandfather in truth no matter what others said. Mifune was speaking quietly to the Hokage. Her eyes slid sideways and met Naruto's violet ones, and she smiled, eyes flashing red in the distance. Naruto shivered, turning back, and kept walking. This was the life he wanted, the life of a shinobi. Right? Did that mean he'd decided? Naruto kept walking. His head was a bundle of different feelings. But as fear faded, excitement tore through him and he couldn't stop the hope blossoming inside him as he realized he liked the feeling he'd gotten in the crowd. Fear, yes, but adrenaline too. The same feeling when he focused on a new project, uncertainty, a competitiveness, a knife-edge emotional blend of the two. Energy buzzed under his skin, not the powerful rush of chakra, but an eagerness, the same dangerous feeling that made him volunteer for adventures outside fetching deliveries from the various Fuin smiths in Musashi and Sekiro City. That feeling times 1,000 tonight. Fuin crafting was great and fun and very, very easy at his level, but this feeling. This was something else. Death had been so close as he watched the man running towards that group of shinobi, and it made him feel alive. His heartbeat pounded in his ears and behind his eyes, made him hate the idea of staying one more day inside these mountain walls separated from the world that his parents had made their own. His home, his real home, waiting out there in the world. His Hokage had saved him and smiled at him. And maybe it wasn't so bad she knew who he was? That made him special, right? Singled out by the Hokage to save? Mifune had promised that if he truly had made up his mind, that he'd send him out on the next caravan out to Konohagakure. Naruto grinned, clenching his fists, and broke into a sprint. Yes, being in Uzumaki was a death sentence, and that was scary, but Shimizu and Rorin, the only friends he'd had or wanted, always scolded him that he needed more excitement in his life, that he couldn't waste his days playing pranks on Yujimba, Taza, or Furu, or even scribbling in Auron's dungeon with just his Fuin for company. He doubted this is what they meant, but that conversation about his future with Mifune, that needed to happen. That was exactly what he planned to do. First thing tomorrow. Auron was waiting for him when he arrived back at the smithy. The wide man seemed displeased or maybe worried. It was hard to tell exactly what he was thinking through his thick beard. The whole day was shaping up to be strange and exhausting. Naruto's head was spinning, Mifune's strangely dark mood and musing, Auron pushing Naruto into journeyman trials, not to mention the Hokage of all people, here. That didn't even account for the attack that, well, failed. Are you okay, Naruto? What happened? I lost you in the crowd. Auron put a hand out to block Naruto as he scrambled past. His shift was nearly over, so Naruto started to gather up his tools and his scroll that contained all his notes and ideas for new Fuin. Auron couldn't make heads or tails of it, so it was mostly safe, but he liked to keep it on him anyway. Naruto eyed Auron, responding but not stopping his rummaging. Tools clanged metal on metal as he shuffled through various piles of things searching. Attack. That red asshole. Language. Asshole is here from Mist. The one that butchered all those people? A big sigh, Gusty. Auron hated bad language. Something about it contributed to making Smiths like him seem uneducated and dumb. Naruto was a big believer in calling it like he saw it, and Auron was a big hypocrite since Naruto learned all his language from his master. Well, him and Shimizu. She could swear like her hair was on fire. Right. The Seifuku-sha murdered people and strung them up like grotesque puppets, or so the rumors went. Why Mifune was entertaining the man without opening him up with his blade made no sense to Naruto. The old guy had always preached about honor above all things. It was what set the samurai apart from their honorless cousins, the shinobi. Naruto had always rolled his eyes. He didn't see much point in a fair fight if the guy you were fighting was stronger than you. Mifune had always had a headache by this point in the conversation. Yeah, sure, don't stab the guy in the back. But don't give him his sword back when he drops it either. Hands were thrown up and Mifune would usually walk away. The last item he'd been looking for was next to the silvery coffin thing they'd discovered, the Fuins still glittering at him like fairy lights. The mystery of that was almost as exciting to him as the thought of really becoming a shinobi, but he could only make an exciting life out of one of them. Reluctantly, he tore his eyes away from it and scooped up his knife from where it sat, holstering it in the leather sheath on his thigh. Auron leaned against the wall. Naruto could almost see the cloud of worry over his head. Inviting genocidal maniacs into their homes would do that, Naruto supposed. Look, Grandpa has this handled. He's the shogun. That's like, better than a Hokage. Auron didn't look reassured, but he did give him a slight smile. You're a good lad, Naruto. Head on home now. Straight home, ya hear? None o' this detourin'. I don't want the shogun knocking on my smithy again because you're missin'. We'll do our investigatin' tomorrow bright and early. Naruto rolled his eyes. He'd detoured once to the water gardens with Shimizu and Rorin, and they sent out the hounds after an hour. Now, they didn't need to know they were pranking that idiot psycho who'd cracked Rorin in the jaw last week for something no doubt stupid. Naruto couldn't stand bullies, and when they'd found out that psycho was going to be skinny dipping with his buddies, well, the rest was inevitable. Was it his fault that the ass had been caught naked in public? Literally? Yeah. Naruto pushed the door open, but paused as he slung the bag onto his shoulder where it clanked. This might be the last time he'd be in this forge, with Auron, for a very long time. If ever. That is, if his conversation with Mifune about his future and testing day went as he hoped. Change was good, right? Naruto waved to Auron, the man raising one in response, and he headed out into the night, headed for his home and especially his bed. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough.